The November air carried the scent of roasted turkey and sage as I pulled into my childhood home's driveway, my stomach churning with more than just hunger. Something felt different this Thanksgiving, a strange electricity in the air that made my skin prickle with unease. Through the dining room window, I could see my father pacing back and forth, his hands gesturing animatedly, while my siblings Jake and Emma sat at the table with expressions I couldn't quite read. As I stepped through the front door, the familiar warmth of home embraced me, but their faces told a different story. My father's eyes sparkled with an excitement I hadn't seen in years, while Jake and Emma exchanged glances that looked almost victorious. We gathered around the table, the traditional feast spread before us, when my father stood raising his champagne glass with theatrical flair. "I have an announcement that will change everything," he declared, his voice booming with pride. My brother Jake leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at his lips, while Emma twisted her napkin, barely containing her glee. "We're selling Morrison Industries, the family business your grandfather built from nothing. And before you ask Belle, you're getting nothing from the sale." The crystal glass in my hand remained steady as I set down my fork, meeting his gaze with perfect calm. The silence that followed my father's announcement lasted only seconds before Jake and Emma burst into celebration, their cheers echoing through the dining room like victory bells. My father, Robert Morrison, stood tall at the head of the table, his 62-year-old frame radiating the authority he'd wielded over Morrison Industries for the past 30 years. His salt and pepper hair caught the light from the chandelier as he began his explanation, each word carefully chosen to justify what they all clearly believed was a righteous decision. "Belle, this wasn't an easy choice," he began, though the satisfaction in his voice suggested otherwise. "Your mother and I have given this considerable thought over the past 2 years. When Everest Holdings approached us 6 months ago with an offer of $50 million, we knew we had to consider what was best for the family's future." My mother, Linda, nodded beside him, her perfectly manicured hands folded in her lap. At 58, she still maintained the polished appearance of a successful businessman's wife, her blonde hair styled in the same bob she'd worn for 20 years. "We've consulted with estate lawyers, financial advisors, and most importantly, we've considered who has shown true dedication to Morrison Industries." She added her tone, suggesting she was reciting a rehearsed speech. Jake leaned forward, his 32-year-old face glowing with triumph. As the eldest child and only son, he'd always assumed the business would be his birthright. His brown hair, styled exactly like our father's had been at his age, framed features that radiated entitlement. "The family trust has a specific clause, Belle. It requires active participation in the family business for any heir to claim their portion. You haven't set foot in the Morrison Industries offices for 5 years. Not since you ran off to Stanford for your fancy MBA, Emma chimed in, her voice dripping with resentment. At 28, my younger sister had perfected the art of playing the victim while wielding her words like weapons. Her designer dress and expensive jewelry suggested she'd already been spending based on her expected windfall. While Jake and I were here working 60-hour weeks learning the business from the ground up, you were in California pretending to be too good for us. I remained silent, letting them reveal the full extent of their betrayal. The turkey on my plate grew cold as I listened, each word adding another piece to a puzzle I was beginning to understand with crystal clarity. Robert continued pulling out a manila folder he'd apparently kept hidden beneath his chair. We've documented everything, Belle. Every family business meeting you missed, every company event you skipped, every opportunity you had to be part of Morrison Industries that you rejected. He spread papers across the table like evidence in a trial. Jake has been keeping meticulous records. My brother's smirk widened as he produced his own set of documents. 3 years of absence from the annual shareholders' meetings, 4 years of missed company holiday parties, 5 years since you last reviewed a single financial report or participated in any strategic planning session. He tapped each paper with his finger, a prosecutor presenting his case. I've had Marcus draw up the legal framework. It's airtight. Marcus Chen, our cousin and the family's lawyer, shifted uncomfortably in his seat at the far end of the table. His presence at what should have been an intimate family gathering suddenly made sense. At 35, he'd built his practice on the Morrison family's legal needs, and clearly he'd chosen his side in this battle. "The documentation is comprehensive," he confirmed, adjusting his glasses nervously. "The trust's language is clear, and the precedent supports the family's decision. We've been planning this for 2 years." Linda revealed her mask of motherly concern, slipping to show the calculation beneath. "Ever since you turned down the position of operations manager to pursue your own interests. We knew then that you'd chosen your path, and it wasn't with the family." Emma pulled out her phone, scrolling through what appeared to be a carefully organized photo album. "I've been documenting too," she said proudly. "Every family business discussion you weren't part of, every decision made without your input. Did you know the company's value has increased by 40% in the last 2 years? That's all happened without you, Belle. Jake implemented new manufacturing processes. I revolutionized our marketing approach, and you were nowhere to be found." The irony of her claims would have been amusing if the betrayal wasn't so profound. I watched as she showed photos of company meetings, family strategy sessions, and celebration dinners, all carefully curated to show my absence while highlighting their presence. What she didn't show, what none of them acknowledged, was the context behind my absence, or the real reason Morrison Industries had survived long enough to receive a $50 million offer. "The buyer specifically requested a clean transition." Robert continued, his chest puffing with pride. "Everest Holdings wants Morrison Industries, but they want it without complications. They were very clear that all family members currently active in the business would be retained as consultants for the transition period. That means Jake and Emma will each receive $2 million in consulting fees on top of their share of the sale price. While you," Jake interrupted, unable to contain his glee, "will receive exactly what you've contributed to this company in the last 5 years. Nothing." My Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister who'd been suspiciously quiet throughout dinner, had her phone positioned at an angle that suggested she was recording the entire confrontation. At 55, she'd always been jealous of our family's success, and her presence at this particular Thanksgiving now seemed orchestrated rather than coincidental. "We've already updated the will," Linda announced, producing another set of documents. "You're being removed as a beneficiary from all family trusts, the estate, and any future inheritance. We've left you a token amount to prevent any legal challenges. $10,000. That should be enough to show we didn't forget you entirely." The cruelty of the amount wasn't lost on me. $10,000 from a $50 million sale, from a business worth that much, only because of sacrifices they knew nothing about. I noticed how they'd positioned themselves around the table, creating a unified front against me. This wasn't just a business decision. This was a carefully orchestrated excommunication from the family. "The closing is scheduled for December 15th. Robert announced. "We wanted to tell you before the news went public. Despite everything, you're still our daughter, and you deserve to hear it from us first." The false magnanimity in his voice might have been believable if I hadn't seen the gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. This was his moment of triumph, the culmination of years of resentment over my refusal to follow the path he'd laid out for me. In his mind, I'd chosen education over family ambition, over loyalty and independence over obedience. Now he believed I was facing the consequences of those choices. "Everest Holdings will take possession of everything," Emma added, unable to resist twisting the knife. "The manufacturing facilities, the distribution network, the contracts, even the Morrison name in the industry. Jake's being promoted to president of operations for the transition. I'm the new chief financial officer. Mom and Dad will serve on the advisory board for 5 years with annual salaries of $500,000 each. Everyone wins," Jake concluded, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Everyone who stayed loyal to the family, that is." The room fell silent as they waited for my response. They expected tears, perhaps, or anger, or desperate pleas for reconsideration. What they didn't expect was the small smile that played at the corners of my mouth as I reached for my water glass, taking a slow sip while I formulated my response to their carefully planned betrayal. The condensation on my water glass reminded me of another Thanksgiving 5 years ago, when everything changed. As my family sat around me, reveling in their perceived victory, my mind drifted back to that night when I discovered the truth that would alter the trajectory of all our lives. It had been 3 a.m, and I'd been working late at Morrison Industries trying to understand why our accounts weren't balancing. At 25, I'd been the unofficial financial analyst, a role I'd taken on while completing my undergraduate degree in business. The offices were empty, just me and the hum of fluorescent lights as I pored over spreadsheets that refused to make sense. That's when I found the first discrepancy. $20,000 mysteriously transferred from the operating budget to an account I didn't recognize. Then another transfer, $35,000, then $50,000. The pattern emerged like a cancer, spreading through our financial records, and at the center of it all was Jake's authorization code. I remember the way my hands shook as I printed the evidence page after page of embezzlement that totaled nearly $800,000 over 18 months. Our company was hemorrhaging money not from poor sales or bad management, but from my own brother's theft. The gambling receipts I found hidden in his desk drawer told the rest of the story. Online poker, sports, betting, casino markers. Jake had developed a gambling addiction that was devouring Morrison Industries from the inside. The next morning, I confronted him in the parking lot before anyone else arrived. The cocky exterior crumbled instantly when I showed him the evidence. He broke down sobbing against his car, begging me not to tell our father. He swore it was under control, that he'd already started attending meetings, that he just needed time to fix it. "Dad will disown me," he'd pleaded, his face streaked with tears. "You know how he is about the family reputation. This will kill him, Belle. It'll destroy Mom. Please." I should have gone straight to our parents. Any reasonable person would have. But as I looked at my older brother, broken and desperate, I saw the little boy who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd defended me from bullies in middle school, who'd driven 6 hours to pick me up when my car broke down freshman year of college. Family meant something then, or at least I thought it did. The solution came to me during a sleepless night. Morrison Industries needed an immediate cash infusion to cover the shortfall before the annual audit. We had 3 weeks. I liquidated my entire savings, $23,000, saved from summer jobs and internships. Then I took out personal loans, maxing out my credit capacity, $40,000 from one bank, $30,000 from another, $25,000 from a third. I even sold my car, the used Honda Civic our grandfather had given me for graduation. But it wasn't enough. The hole Jake had created was too deep. That's when I made the decision that would haunt my family's perception of me for years. I applied to Stanford's MBA program not for the prestige or career advancement, but for the student loans. With my acceptance came access to federal and private student loans that I could divert to save Morrison Industries. I funneled $140,000 back into the company accounts over 2 months, disguising the transfers as legitimate transactions from shell consulting contracts I created. The remaining debt was restructured through a private loan I negotiated with a family friend who owed me a favor, someone who agreed to keep the arrangement confidential. Jake watched me work with a mixture of awe and shame, promising he'd find a way to pay me back. I made him swear to get help to attend Gamblers Anonymous to never touch the company funds again. More importantly, I made him promise to never tell anyone what I'd done. The last thing I wanted was to be seen as the family's savior or to hold this over his head forever. Moving to California for Stanford wasn't abandoning my family. It was exile by necessity. I needed to be away from Morrison Industries to maintain the fiction, to keep anyone from looking too closely at the financial maneuvers I'd performed. Plus, I needed to actually get the MBA to justify the massive loans I'd taken out. Those 2 years at Stanford were the hardest of my life. While my classmates networked over expensive dinners and weekend trips to Napa Valley, I worked 3 jobs just to eat. Monday through Wednesday, I was a teaching assistant for undergraduate finance courses. Thursday and Friday nights, I waitressed at a local restaurant until 2 in the morning. Weekends were spent doing freelance financial consulting for small businesses, building models and analyzing data for companies that couldn't afford big firms. Every extra penny went back to Morrison Industries. Not directly, that would have raised questions. Instead, I funneled money through legitimate channels. I'd identify potential clients and send them to Morrison Industries, taking no finder's fee. I'd create marketing analyses and strategic plans during my few free hours, emailing them to Jake to present as his own work. When I learned about supply chain innovations in class, I'd write detailed implementation plans and ship them home, letting Emma take credit for the revolutionary ideas she was bringing to the company. The supply chain system, they were so proud of, the one that had supposedly increased company value by 40%. I designed that during my operations management course at Stanford. Professor Williams had called it graduate-level brilliance and suggested I patent the process. Instead, I sent it home as a suggestion for Jake to consider, complete with implementation guidelines that a child could follow. My parents never questioned why I lived in a studio apartment so small I could touch both walls with my arms outstretched. They never asked why I couldn't afford to fly home for holidays or why I always had an excuse when they offered to visit. When Emma posted photos of her European vacation funded by her Morrison Industries bonus, I was calculating how many extra shifts I'd need to cover next month's loan payment. The physical toll was significant. I lost 20 pounds I couldn't afford to lose. Chronic stress led to insomnia, which led to reliance on caffeine, which led to more stress. During finals week of my second year, I collapsed in the library and woke up in the hospital diagnosed with exhaustion and dehydration. The doctor who treated me said I was running on empty, burning through reserves I didn't have. I discharged myself after 6 hours because I couldn't afford the hospital bill and had a consulting project due the next day. But the worst part wasn't the physical hardship. It was watching from afar as my sacrifice was rewritten into betrayal. Family emails talked about how well Morrison Industries was doing under Jake's leadership, how Emma's fresh perspective was revitalizing the company, how proud they were of the children who'd stayed loyal. Meanwhile, I was cast as the ungrateful daughter who'd abandoned her heritage for selfish ambitions. Jake sent me exactly one email during those 2 years. "Thanks for everything," it read. "I'm clean now. GA saved my life. I'll find a way to make this right." He never did. The gambling stopped, but the gratitude evaporated as soon as the immediate crisis passed. Success has a way of making people forget who pulled them from the abyss. When I graduated from Stanford, I had job offers from Goldman Sachs McKinsey and several Fortune 500 companies. The signing bonuses alone would have eliminated half my debt. Instead, I took a position with a small investment firm that specialized in distressed assets. The salary was modest, but it gave me something more valuable than money. It gave me knowledge and connections in the world of corporate acquisitions. My family interpreted this choice as another snub. Why work for a no-name firm when prestigious companies were calling? Why settle for less when the Morrison name could open doors? They didn't understand that I was playing a longer game, that every distressed company I analyzed, every acquisition I facilitated, every turnaround I witnessed, was teaching me skills I'd need for what was coming. The loans were crushing. Federal student loans, private student loans, personal loans, credit card debt from those early emergency infusions. My total debt load reached $320,000. My monthly payments consumed 80% of my salary. I lived on ramen noodles and hope, knowing that someday the sacrifice would mean something. I never told anyone the truth. Not when Emma called me selfish for missing her engagement party. Not when my mother cried about my absence at family gatherings. Not when my father wrote me a long letter about disappointment and family duty. I absorbed their accusations like penance, knowing that the truth would destroy more than it would heal. Jake's reputation, the family's image, Morrison Industries' stability, all depended on maintaining the lie. The irony was that my absence made their success possible. Every innovation Jake claimed, every brilliant strategy Emma proposed, every uptick in company value stemmed from the work I did in California libraries and coffee shops. I was the ghost in Morrison Industries' machine, the invisible hand guiding its resurrection, the family member they disowned who saved them all. Now, as I sat at this Thanksgiving table watching them celebrate my disinheritance from a company I'd bled for, the full weight of the irony wasn't lost on me. They were selling the business I'd saved, dividing money that existed only because of my sacrifice, excluding the one person who'd given everything to keep Morrison Industries alive. But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Because while they'd been planning my exclusion for 2 years, I'd been planning something else entirely. Something that would soon make this moment of perceived triumph the beginning of their education in what family really meant. Emma's perfectly manicured nails tapped against her champagne flute as she prepared to deliver what she clearly considered the killing blow. Her smile radiated the kind of cruel satisfaction that only comes from years of nursed resentment finally finding its outlet. "Oh, Belle, there's more you should know." She began, her voice honeyed with false sympathy. "Since you've been gone, I've been promoted to Chief Financial Officer of Morrison Industries. You remember, don't you? The position Dad promised you when you were his little princess back when you actually cared about this family." The position she referenced had been discussed when I was 22, fresh out of college with a finance degree, and dreams of modernizing our family business. Our father had taken me into his study, poured 2 glasses of his favorite scotch, and mapped out a 10-year plan that would see me rise from analyst to CFO. That promise had died the night I discovered Jake's theft, though Robert Morrison never knew why his daughter suddenly became distant from the company's daily operations. "I've been doing incredible work." Emma continued, producing a tablet from her designer handbag. "Let me show you what real dedication looks like." She swiped through presentation slides with the practiced air of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "This is the new financial reporting system I implemented. It's increased our efficiency by 35%. I recognized the system immediately. It was based on the framework I'd sent home 16 months ago, disguised as a casual suggestion in an email to Jake. Even the color coding was identical to my original design. "And this," she swiped again, "is the revolutionary supply chain management system I developed. We've cut costs by 22% while improving delivery times. Forbes is doing a feature on it next month. They're calling me one of the 30 under 30 innovators in manufacturing." Each slide was a dagger of familiarity. The supply chain system had been my final project at Stanford, a comprehensive reimagining of Morrison Industries' entire distribution network. I'd spent 3 months perfecting every detail from vendor relationships to inventory management protocols. Seeing it presented as Emma's brainchild while she basked in recognition felt like watching someone steal your child and claim it as their own. "The board of directors has been so impressed." Robert added his pride in Emma. "Evident. She's brought fresh perspectives we desperately needed. Real innovation, not theoretical classroom nonsense." The dig at my education was intentional, but I maintained my composure watching as they continued to unveil the scope of their deception. Linda produced a leather-bound folder from beside her chair. "We wanted to be completely transparent with you, Belle. This is the new will." She slid it across the table with the solemnity of a judge passing sentence. "Marcus has reviewed every line. It's been notarized and filed with the court." I picked up the document, scanning through legalese that systematically erased my existence from the Morrison family legacy. Every asset, every heirloom, every piece of property had been redistributed among Jake, Emma, and various cousins who'd shown appropriate loyalty. The family cabin where I'd spent every summer until age 18, where Grandpa had taught me to fish and told stories about building Morrison Industries from nothing, was now designated solely for Emma's future children. "You'll notice we've left you $10,000, Marcus interjected, his voice clinical. "That's specifically to avoid any claims of complete disinheritance. Legal precedent suggests token bequests prevent successful challenges to estate distribution. How thoughtful, I murmured, continuing to read. Page after page detailed my exclusion with surgical precision. The Morrison Family Trust, established by my grandfather to ensure his descendants would always have security, had been amended with a participation clause that retroactively disqualified me. The timestamp showed it had been modified just 6 months ago, meaning they'd been planning this while still sending me birthday cards signed Love, Mom, and Dad. There's something else, Jake said, unable to contain his excitement. Everest Holdings had very specific requirements for the acquisition. They wanted assurance that all intellectual property, including any innovations developed by family members during their association with Morrison Industries, would transfer cleanly to them. He produced another document. This is interesting, Belle. According to our lawyers, any ideas or systems you might have contributed during your time with the company, however minimal, belong to Morrison Industries. So even if you had some fantasy about claiming credit for anything, you legally can't. That's assuming I contributed anything worth claiming. I responded mildly, watching confusion flicker across his face at my calm reaction. Patricia, still recording everything on her phone, decided to contribute. I think this is wonderful, she announced. It's about time this family rewarded loyalty over ambition. Some people need to learn that you can't abandon your roots and expect to harvest the fruit. Her metaphor was mixed, but her meaning was clear. Patricia had always resented our family's success, spending years making snide comments about privilege and luck, while simultaneously angling for loans she never repaid. Her presence at this particular Thanksgiving made perfect sense now. She was here to witness and record my humiliation, probably planning to share the video with her social circle as evidence that the mighty Morrison family wasn't so perfect after all. The buyer was very specific about another requirement, Robert continued. They want assurance that you'll have no future involvement with Morrison Industries or any of its subsidiaries. They've asked for a signed statement from you, acknowledging the sale and agreeing to have no claims on the company going forward. Emma slid another document across the table. We'll need your signature before you leave tonight. Marcus will notarize it and Patricia can serve as witness. Clean and simple. The document was a masterpiece of legal manipulation. Not only would I be signing away any claim to Morrison Industries, but I'd also be acknowledging that I'd made no significant contributions to the company and had no intellectual property rights to any systems or processes currently in use. It was designed to be humiliating, forcing me to officially admit my irrelevance to the company's success. Everest Holdings sounds like a thorough buyer. I observed, setting the document aside unsigned. Tell me, how did they find Morrison Industries? We're not exactly a high-profile acquisition target. They have excellent research capabilities, Robert replied proudly. Their representative said they'd been tracking our growth for 2 years. They were particularly impressed by the innovations Jake and Emma brought to the company. Apparently, we fit perfectly into their portfolio of family businesses turned modern enterprises. And they specifically requested that I have no involvement. Absolutely, Jake confirmed. They were adamant, said they'd researched all family members and determined that only active participants in the business would add value going forward. They even knew about your MBA, Belle. Said they had no interest in academic theorists who'd abandoned the practical side of business. The precision of Everest Holdings' requirements should have raised red flags for anyone paying attention, but my family was too intoxicated by the $50 million price tag to question why a buyer would be so specifically interested in excluding one family member. The representative was quite charming, Linda added. A lovely woman named Sarah Chen. No relation to Marcus, of course. She said their CEO is a visionary who specializes in transforming traditional businesses for the global market. Did you meet this visionary CEO? I asked. No need. Robert dismissed. Sarah had full authority to negotiate. She said the CEO prefers to remain hands-off until after acquisitions are complete. Apparently, they're quite private, all very professional. Emma pulled up something on her phone. I researched them extensively. Everest Holdings has an impressive portfolio. They own 12 companies with combined revenues over $300 million. Their website lists dozens of successful acquisitions and turnarounds. It's exactly the kind of buyer we want for Morrison Industries. And they're paying cash, Jake added. Full $50 million, no financing contingencies, no earn-out provisions. Just a clean, simple sale that closes in 3 weeks. The timing is perfect. Linda sighed contentedly. We'll have everything finalized before Christmas. A new year and a new beginning for the Morrison family. Well, for most of the Morrison family. The cruelty was so casual, it might have been breathtaking if I hadn't spent 2 years preparing for exactly this moment. They moved through the betrayal like a well-rehearsed play, each actor hitting their marks with precision. The loving family facade had finally fallen away completely, revealing the calculating strangers beneath. There is one small matter, Marcus said, adjusting his glasses nervously. Belle hasn't signed the acknowledgement yet. We really do need that signature tonight. Of course, I said, picking up the pen they'd thoughtfully provided. But first, I have just a few questions about Everest Holdings. You know how I am about details. I saw the first flicker of uncertainty cross Robert's face. After all, attention to detail had once been something he'd praised in me back when I was still considered a true Morrison. What kind of questions? He asked warily. Oh, just curiosity, I replied, twirling the pen between my fingers. After all, Morrison Industries is being sold for $50 million. Don't you think we should know a little more about who's buying our grandfather's legacy? I set the pen down deliberately, letting it roll across the polished mahogany table as I reached for the acquisition documents. The weight of the paper felt substantial in my hands, like holding the culmination of years of planning. Around me, my family shifted uncomfortably, their celebration momentarily paused by my unexpected interest in the details. May I asked, gesturing to the full contract Robert had proudly displayed earlier. He hesitated for a moment before sliding the thick folder toward me, his confidence wavering slightly at my calm demeanor. I don't see what good it will do you, he said. The deal is already signed. We're just waiting for the formal closing. Humor me, I replied, opening the folder and beginning to scan through the pages with practiced efficiency. Years of analyzing distressed acquisitions had taught me to spot unusual terms quickly. After all, I did get that fancy MBA you all keep mentioning. Might as well use it one last time for the family. Emma rolled her eyes. Always trying to prove you're the smartest person in the room. Some things never change. I ignored her, focusing on the contract's structure. The first few pages were standard boilerplate, but as I delved deeper, interesting patterns emerged. The payment terms were unusual for a cash deal of this size. Instead of a simple wire transfer, the contract specified a complex series of transactions through multiple holding companies. This payment structure, I said, looking up at Robert. Did anyone question why Everest Holdings needs to route the money through 5 different entities? It's for tax efficiency, Jake answered quickly. Sarah explained it all. Perfectly normal for acquisitions of this size. Is it? I mused, returning to the documents. And this acceleration clause here, the one that triggers if any family member contests the sale. It reduces the purchase price by 70%. That seems rather severe. Marcus shifted in his seat. That's just to ensure a smooth transition. Buyers don't want drama. No, they certainly don't, I agreed, flipping to another section. This is fascinating, though. The due diligence period was only 2 weeks. For a $50 million acquisition, that's remarkably fast. Most buyers want at least 60 days to examine a company this thoroughly. They knew what they wanted, Robert said defensively. Sarah said their team had done preliminary research for months. Of course they had, I murmured, finding what I was looking for in the appendices. Oh, this is interesting. Very interesting indeed. What? Linda asked, despite herself. The intellectual property assignment clause. It's retroactive to 10 years ago and includes any innovation systems or processes developed by any Morrison family member, regardless of where or when they were created. I looked up at Emma. That means your famous supply chain system, the one Forbes is writing about now, belongs entirely to Everest Holdings. Emma's face flushed. So what I developed it for Morrison Industries anyway. Did you? I asked mildly, because this clause suggests Everest Holdings thinks innovations might have come from unexpected sources. Why else make it so comprehensive? Jake snatched the contract from me, scanning the section I'd highlighted. His face paled as he read the fine print. This can't be right. This says they own everything, even ideas we might develop in the future related to manufacturing or distribution. For 5 years post-acquisition, I confirmed. Rather restrictive, wouldn't you say, almost as if they're trying to prevent someone from recreating Morrison Industries' success elsewhere. You're trying to scare us, Robert accused, though uncertainty crept into his voice. The deal is good. Our lawyers reviewed everything. Did they? I asked, turning to Marcus. Did you notice the arbitration clause, all disputes must be handled through Everest Holdings' chosen arbitrator in Delaware? Not Massachusetts, where Morrison Industries is incorporated, not here where we live. Delaware. Do you know what's special about Delaware corporate law, Marcus? Our cousin adjusted his glasses nervously. It's business-friendly. It's extremely favorable to majority shareholders and acquiring companies, I corrected. If any issues arise post-sale, you'll be fighting uphill in a jurisdiction that heavily favors Everest Holdings. Patricia had stopped recording her phone, lowering as she sensed the shift in room dynamics. The celebration atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by growing unease. None of this matters, Emma insisted, though her voice lacked its earlier confidence. The company is successful, the buyer is legitimate, and we're getting $50 million. You're just bitter about being excluded. Perhaps, I conceded, returning to the documents. But indulge me in one more observation. This signature page, the one with Sarah Chen's name. Notice anything unusual? They all leaned in to look. The signature was pristine, almost too perfect. It's signed electronically, Linda observed. So, I continued, for a deal of this magnitude with this many unusual clauses, wouldn't you expect to meet face to face, to have original signatures on paper? When Morrison Industries bought the Whitman warehouse 3 years ago for just $2 million, we spent 6 months in negotiations and signed everything in person. Times have changed, Robert said, but his conviction was weakening. Everything's digital now. True, I agreed. But look at this corporate structure diagram in Appendix B. Everest Holdings ownership goes through 7 layers of holding companies, all registered in different states. The ultimate parent company is registered in Delaware, but its ownership is listed as another holding company in Nevada, which is owned by a trust in South Dakota. That's just corporate structuring, Marcus said, though he was now reviewing the documents with renewed attention. Lots of companies do that. Absolutely. I nodded. But it makes it nearly impossible to determine who actually owns Everest Holdings. For all you know, you could be selling to anyone, a competitor, a foreign entity, even someone with a personal connection to Morrison Industries. Jake laughed nervously. That's ridiculous. Who would go through all that trouble? Someone very patient, I suggested. Someone who knew exactly what they wanted and how to get it. Tell me, when did Everest Holdings first approach you? 6 months ago, Robert answered slowly. Right after our quarterly report showed record profits. And when did you start planning to exclude me from the sale? Silence fell over the room. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. That's just a coincidence, Emma stammered. Is it? I asked. Did Everest Holdings suggest the exclusion, or was it your idea? My family exchanged glances, trying to remember the exact sequence of events. Sarah mentioned they'd done background on all family members, Jake admitted. She said they only wanted to work with family members active in the business. How convenient, I observed. And you never questioned why a buyer would care about that, why they'd specifically want to exclude one family member who hasn't been involved in operations for 5 years. "You're being paranoid," Robert said, but sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. "Am I?" I asked, setting down the contract and looking at each of them in turn. "You're about to sell our grandfather's life work to a company you've never visited, run by people you've never met, structured in a way that obscures its true ownership with terms that heavily favor them in any dispute based on the recommendation that you exclude your own daughter from any benefit. And you never once thought to ask the simple question, who is behind Everest Holdings?" The room fell silent except for the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Each tick seemed to echo the growing realization that perhaps they hadn't been as clever as they'd thought. "So," I said, finally breaking the silence, "let me ask that question now, the one you should have asked 6 months ago. Dad, who exactly is the CEO of Everest Holdings?" Robert's face had gone from red to pale. He fumbled with his phone, presumably looking for Sarah Chen's contact information. Sarah said it wasn't important, that the CEO preferred to remain anonymous until after the closing." "Anonymous," I repeated. "You're selling a $50 million company to an anonymous buyer who specifically wanted me excluded from the deal, and that didn't raise any red flags." "The money is real," Jake insisted. "We've seen proof of funds." "Oh, I'm sure the money is real," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Everest Holdings is very real, very successful, and very capable of completing this acquisition. The question is, who controls that money?" Emma slammed her hand on the table. "Enough games, Belle. If you know something, just say it." "But where's the fun in that?" I asked, allowing myself a small smile. "You've all spent 2 years planning my exclusion, documenting my absence, building your case against me. The least I can do is return the favor with a little drama of my own." "This isn't a game," Linda said, her voice shaking. "This is our family's future." Yes, I agreed, standing and walking to the window that overlooked the garden where I'd played as a child. "It certainly is." I stood at the window, gazing out at the garden where Grandfather Morrison had taught me to plant tomatoes when I was 6 years old, the same garden where he'd told me stories about building Morrison Industries from a single delivery truck into a regional manufacturing powerhouse. His words echoed in my memory. "Success isn't about taking from others, Belle. It's about creating something bigger than yourself." The silence in the dining room had become suffocating. I could feel their eyes boring into my back, their minds racing to understand what they'd missed. The hunter had become the hunted, and they were just beginning to realize it. "Let me tell you a story." I began, still facing the window, about a young woman who loved her family more than they ever knew. She watched them build their plans, construct their betrayals, convince themselves of their righteousness. She could have fought them, could have revealed truths that would have shattered their delusions. Instead, she chose a different path. I turned to face them, noting how Jake's confident posture had crumbled, how Emma clutched her champagne glass with white knuckles, how my parents seemed to have aged years in minutes. 2 years ago, at Cousin Maria's wedding, Jake had too much to drink. I continued moving slowly around the table. He found me on the terrace and started rambling about the family's plans, how Dad was sick of my California pretensions, how Emma felt I'd abandoned her, how they were going to make sure I understood the cost of choosing education over family. Jake's face went ashen. I don't remember. "You rarely remember your drunk confessions, Jake," I said gently. "Like the time you told me about the gambling or when you admitted that you'd been skimming from the company. Old habits, even when broken, leave scars on the memory." "That's in the past," he said desperately. "I've been clean for 4 years." "Yes, you have," I acknowledged, "and I'm proud of you for that. But that night at Maria's wedding, when you told me about the family's plan to cut me out of Morrison Industries, you gave me something invaluable. You gave me time." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, setting it on the table. The elegant black card bore a simple inscription, "Everest Holdings, LLC," Belle Morrison, Chief Executive Officer. The silence that followed was complete. Even the grandfather clock seemed to pause its ticking in deference to the moment. Patricia's forgotten phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto her plate with a sound that made everyone jump. "No." Robert whispered the word, barely audible. "That's not possible." "Isn't it?" I asked. 18 months ago, I incorporated Everest Holdings in Delaware. I chose the name because grandfather always said reaching the top of the business world was like climbing Everest. You need preparation, patience, and the willingness to take paths others won't consider. Emma stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're lying. Everest Holdings has a portfolio worth hundreds of millions. You're a mid-level analyst at a nothing firm." I corrected. "I was a mid-level analyst at Meridian Capital. What you didn't know was that Meridian specialized in distressed acquisitions. My boss, David Chen, no relation to Marcus, taught me everything about building an acquisition portfolio. He also became my first investor when I showed him my business plan." "This is impossible," Linda said, shaking her head in denial. "We researched Everest Holdings, the website, the portfolio companies, the financial statements. All real," I confirmed. "Every company, every acquisition, every dollar. Would you like to know how a 29-year-old woman built a $300 million portfolio in 18 months? Without waiting for an answer, I pulled out my phone and cast the screen to the smart TV in the corner of the dining room. A presentation appeared, one I'd prepared months ago for this moment. "Let's start with Providence Manufacturing," I said, clicking to the first slide. "A family-owned business in Rhode Island drowning in debt because the founder's son had a cocaine problem. Sound familiar? I bought it for $2 million in assumed debt, implemented the supply chain system I'd originally designed for Morrison Industries, and turned it profitable in 6 months. Current value, $15 million. Click. Next slide. Hartwell Logistics. The owner's daughters were fighting over succession while the company bled money. I negotiated a buyout for $3 million, restructured their operations using techniques I learned fixing Jake's messes, and sold 40% to a strategic partner for $12 million. I still own the controlling stake." Click, click, click. Each slide revealed another acquisition, another turnaround, another success, built on the lessons I'd learned, saving Morrison Industries. The pattern was clear. I specialized in family businesses torn apart by internal conflict companies that could be saved if someone cared enough to look past the drama to the potential beneath. 12 companies in 18 months, I summarized. Each one saved from the brink of collapse. Each one transformed using systems and strategies I developed while you thought I was selfishly pursuing my education. Combined annual revenue, $320 million. Combined profit margin, 18%. Available capital for acquisitions, $70 million. $70 million, Jake repeated faintly. "But you offered 50. "Because that's what Morrison Industries is actually worth," I said, clicking to a new slide showing a detailed financial analysis. "Without the intellectual property you've been claiming as your own, without the relationships I've been maintaining behind the scenes, without the strategic vision that came from my theoretical classroom nonsense, Morrison Industries is a regional manufacturer with aging equipment and declining market share." Marcus had been furiously checking his phone, presumably verifying my claims. His face grew paler with each search result. "It's all true," he said quietly. "Every company, every acquisition. Belle Morrison is listed as CEO of Everest Holdings. The Delaware filing is public record." "But Sarah Chen," Robert started. "Is my assistant," I finished. "A brilliant woman who's been invaluable in executing this plan. When she approached you 6 months ago, she was following a script we'd rehearsed dozens of times. Every meeting, every negotiation, every suggestion to exclude me was carefully orchestrated." "You manipulated us." Emma accused, tears starting to form in her eyes. "You set us up." "Did I asked. I offered to buy Morrison Industries for a fair price. You chose to exclude me from the deal. I simply didn't correct your assumption about who was behind the offer. If you'd done proper due diligence, if you'd asked to meet the CEO, if you'd questioned why a buyer would care about excluding one family member, you would have discovered the truth. But you were too blinded by greed and the chance to punish me to ask basic questions. I clicked to the final slide showing a photo of all of us at grandfather's funeral 5 years ago. We stood together by his grave, united in grief, still a family in more than just name. Grandfather left me a letter, I revealed. He knew about Jake's gambling before I did. He knew about Emma's insecurity and need for validation. He knew about Mom and Dad's tendency to favor appearances over substance. And he knew that someday the family would tear itself apart over money. I pulled out a worn envelope from my jacket, grandfather's handwriting still visible on the yellowed paper. He asked me to save Morrison Industries not from financial ruin, but from the family's own worst instincts. He said the company would survive bad markets and tough competition, but it might not survive the Morrisons themselves. So all of this, Linda gestured helplessly around the room, was what some elaborate test. No, I said firmly. This was a rescue mission. If I'd fought you openly 2 years ago when Jake revealed your plans, what would have happened? Lawyers, lawsuits, public embarrassment. The family would have shattered and Morrison Industries would have been collateral damage. Instead, I chose to build something that could save both the company and the family, even if you couldn't see it yet. Patricia had found her phone and was staring at it in shock. This is all being live-streamed, she said faintly. I accidentally hit the button when I dropped my phone. Hundreds of people are watching. I glanced at the screen, seeing the viewer count climbing. How appropriate, I said calmly. The family that planned to document my humiliation is instead broadcasting their own education in humility. Turn it off, Robert commanded, but Patricia's hands were shaking too badly to manage the phone. Let them watch, I said. Let them see what happens when families let greed override love, when parents choose favorites, when siblings treat inheritance like a zero-sum game. But more importantly, let them see that redemption is possible even in the darkest moments of betrayal. I returned to my seat, facing my family across the table that had hosted countless Thanksgiving dinners, birthday celebrations, and family meetings. The same table where grandfather had taught us card games and told stories about the Depression, about building something from nothing with just determination and integrity. So yes, Dad, you're right. Everest Holdings is paying $50 million for Morrison Industries. What you didn't know is that Everest Holdings is me. The contracts you signed, the terms you celebrated, the exclusion you orchestrated, all led to this moment. You successfully excluded me from a deal where I was the buyer. Congratulations on negotiating against yourselves. Jake buried his face in his hands. Emma's tears were flowing freely now. My parents sat frozen, unable to process the complete reversal of their carefully laid plans. The question now, I said softly, is what happens next? The contracts are binding. The sale will proceed. Morrison Industries will become part of Everest Holdings. But what happens to the Morrison family that's still to be determined? The grandfather clock chimed 8 times, marking the hour and the end of one chapter of the Morrison family story. What came next would depend on whether they could find the humility to admit their mistakes and the courage to accept the hand extended by the daughter they'd tried to destroy. The livestream viewer count had reached 3,000 and climbing. Patricia's hands trembled as she finally managed to turn off the broadcast, but the damage was done. The Morrison family's private drama had become public entertainment, and there was no taking it back. I pulled out my laptop from the bag I'd placed discreetly by my chair when I'd arrived. The familiar startup sound seemed to echo in the silent room as I connected it to the dining room's smart TV. My family watched with a mixture of disbelief and growing horror as I navigated to the Everest Holdings corporate portal. Let me show you something, I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard. This is the real Everest Holdings, not the public website Emma found, but the internal dashboard that shows our complete portfolio. The screen filled with a comprehensive display of financial data, company profiles, and performance metrics. Each subsidiary was listed with real-time revenue figures, profit margins, and growth trajectories. The numbers were staggering even to me, seeing them all consolidated in one place. Providence Manufacturing acquired January 2024. I began clicking on the first entry. Initial investment $2 million. Current valuation $15.3 million. The turnaround took 4 months using the supply chain optimization model I developed at Stanford. I clicked through to show the transformation timeline complete with before and after photos of the facility productivity charts and employee testimonials. The workers' faces beamed with pride at their revitalized workplace. Hartwell Logistics, February 2024. The founding family was destroying the company with their succession battle. I spent 3 weeks mediating their dispute before proposing a buyout. Initial investment $3 million. Current valuation $19.7 million. Emma's mascara had created dark streams down her cheeks, but she leaned forward studying the screen with professional interest despite her emotional state. "These margins are impossible," she whispered. "No one achieves 22% in logistics." "They're not impossible when you eliminate family dysfunction and implement efficient systems." I responded, clicking to the next acquisition, Brennan Steel Works, April 2024. The owner's gambling addiction had driven them to the edge of bankruptcy. "Sound familiar, Jake?" My brother flinched as I showed the details of Brennan's transformation. The parallels to Morrison Industries were unmistakable, right down to the embezzlement patterns I'd discovered and quietly resolved. Each acquisition followed a pattern. I explained opening a master spreadsheet that tracked common factors across all 12 companies. Family-owned businesses with strong fundamentals undermined by internal conflict, gambling addictions, succession disputes, sibling rivalries, parental favoritism. Every dysfunction that was destroying Morrison Industries existed in these companies. "You built a business model on family misery," Linda asked, her voice hollow. "I built a business model on family redemption," I corrected. "Every one of these companies still has family members involved, but now they work under professional governance structures that prevent the kind of self-destruction you attempted here. I didn't destroy these families. I saved them from themselves." Marcus had pulled out his own laptop and was frantically researching. The California Secretary of State shows Bell Morrison as CEO of Everest Holdings. Delaware corporate records confirm. The acquisitions are all documented. This is all legal and legitimate. "Of course it's legitimate," I said, switching to a new screen showing my investor list. My initial capital came from 3 sources. First, a personal loan from David Chen at Meridian Capital, who believed in my vision. Second, a line of credit secured by my consulting work. And third, I paused, meeting Jake's eyes. "The money you've been quietly paying back over the past 3 years. "What?" Robert's head snapped toward Jake. "What money?" Jake's face crumbled completely. Bell saved the company 5 years ago, when He couldn't finish the sentence. "When you embezzled $800,000 to feed your gambling addiction," I completed. "I covered it with personal loans and my student loan money. You've been paying me back in installments, thinking it was going into my personal account. Instead, I used every payment as seed capital for Everest Holdings. Your redemption money helped build the company that's now buying Morrison Industries." "$800,000!" Robert repeated, his voice rising. "You stole $800,000! "And Bell saved us," Jake said, finally finding his voice. "She saved the company, saved me from prison, saved our reputation. She gave up everything to protect us, and we tried to destroy her for it." Emma looked between Jake and me, understanding dawning on her face. The supply chain system, the financial reforms, the strategic plans that turned the company around, they were all yours. Every one. I confirmed, showing a folder labeled Morrison Industries Innovations on my laptop. Documented, dated, and filed with my intellectual property attorney 18 months ago. I knew you'd try to claim credit, Emma. I've watched you do it for 2 years, but I needed you to believe you were succeeding on your own merit. It was the only way to keep you all focused on the business while I built Everest Holdings. Robert stood abruptly, his chair tipping backward. This is corporate espionage. You've been sabotaging us, manipulating us. Sabotaging. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Dad, I've been protecting Morrison Industries from your worst decisions for 5 years. Do you know how many times you almost drove the company into bankruptcy with your ego-driven expansion plans? Do you know how many bad deals I killed by having David Chen make competitive offers that forced you to reconsider? I pulled up another file showing a timeline of Morrison Industries' near disasters and corresponding Everest Holdings interventions. Each entry detailed a crisis, averted a bad decision, prevented a catastrophe avoided through careful manipulation of circumstances. March 2024. You wanted to acquire Pemberton Packaging for $15 million. I read from the list. It would have destroyed our cash flow and saddled us with outdated equipment. Everest Holdings made a competing offer that revealed Pemberton's hidden liabilities. You walked away congratulating yourself on your due diligence. June 2024. Emma negotiated an exclusive supplier agreement with Zhao Manufacturing that would have locked us into above-market prices for 5 years. Everest Holdings suddenly expressed interest in Zhao, forcing them to reveal their financial instability. Another bullet dodged. September 2024. Jake pushed for a massive expansion into the cannabis packaging market. Everest Holdings leaked news of pending federal regulations that made you reconsider. You avoided a $10 million mistake. With each revelation, my family's understanding of the past 18 months shifted. What they'd seen as their own brilliant business decisions were exposed as carefully orchestrated saves by the daughter they'd plotted to disinherit. You've been pulling our strings, Emma said, her voice a mixture of awe and anger. We were puppets in your show. You were students in a classroom you didn't know existed, I corrected. Every success you achieved was a lesson in what actually works in business. Every innovation you claimed taught you to value intellectual property. Every crisis averted showed you the importance of careful analysis over emotional decisions. I navigated to a secure folder requiring biometric authentication. My fingerprint unlocked a series of documents that made Marcus gasp. Securities filings, he breathed. You've been buying Morrison Industries stock through nominee accounts. 17% as of last month, I confirmed. Not enough for control, but enough to have visibility into every board decision, every strategic move, every plan to exclude me. Your corporate secretary, Mrs. Patterson, never realized that Mountain View Trust, one of your largest shareholders, was actually an Everest Holdings subsidiary. That's how you knew, Linda said faintly, about the sale, about the exclusion plan, about everything. I've known every move you were going to make before you made it, I said simply. Board meeting minutes, private emails between directors discussing my exclusion, Jake's presentation about documenting my absence, Emma's proposal to claim my innovations as her own. I've read them all. Patricia had been silent since ending the live stream, but now she spoke up. The viewers. They're sending messages, hundreds of them. They're all supporting Belle. They're calling you. She trailed off, unable to repeat the harsh words filling her screen. The court of public opinion has rendered its verdict, I observed. But I'm not interested in public humiliation. I'm interested in justice and redemption. I closed the laptop and looked at each family member in turn. Their faces showed a range of emotions: shock, shame, anger, disbelief, and in Jake's case, something that might have been relief at finally having the truth exposed. Everest Holdings owns or controls assets worth $320 million, I stated. I built it from nothing in 18 months, using every lesson I learned from Morrison Industries' dysfunction. I did it while you planned my exile, while you celebrated my exclusion, while you convinced yourselves that I was a traitor to the family. But the ultimate irony? I continued allowing myself a small smile. The $50 million I'm paying for Morrison Industries. It's more than double what the company is actually worth without my contributions. Even in buying the company that tried to exclude me, I'm being more generous than you ever were. The weight of this final revelation seemed to break something in Robert. He sank back into his chair, aging a decade in moments. "What have we done?" he whispered. "You've learned," I said simply. "The question now is whether you've learned enough to salvage what's left of our family." Robert's hands shook as he reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts with desperate urgency. The confident patriarch who'd started the evening had vanished, replaced by a man watching his carefully constructed reality crumble. He found the number he was looking for and pressed call, putting it on speaker without asking anyone's permission. "Good evening, Mr. Morrison," came the professional voice of Sarah Chen. "I trust you're having a pleasant Thanksgiving." "Sarah?" Robert's voice cracked. "I need to speak with your CEO immediately. There's been a development." "Of course," Sarah replied smoothly. "Let me transfer you to Ms. Morrison now." The silence that followed felt eternal. Then my phone, sitting face up on the table, began to ring. The caller ID showed Robert Morrison, Everest Holdings Business. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Everest Holdings, Bell Morrison speaking. Watching my father's face as he heard my voice through his phone, while looking at me across the table, was a study in cognitive dissonance. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly as his brain struggled to reconcile the betrayal he'd planned with the reversal he was experiencing. "Cat got your tongue, Dad?" I asked, ending the call. "Or are you finally understanding what it feels like to be excluded from your own family's business?" Emma had grabbed Marcus's laptop and was furiously searching through public records. "This can't be legal," she muttered. "There has to be fraud, misrepresentation, something." "Feel free to search," I told her. "Every document filed, every disclosure made, every representation in the purchase agreement is completely accurate. Everest Holdings is a legitimate company with a successful acquisition history. We never claimed to be strangers to Morrison Industries. You simply never asked." Marcus cleared his throat nervously. "Actually, I'm obligated to point out that the purchase agreement has some very specific clauses about fraud and bad faith dealings. Section 17.3, if I recall correctly." I smiled at my cousin. "Excellent memory, Marcus. Would you care to read that section aloud for the family?" He fumbled with the contract, finding the relevant page. His voice was unsteady as he read, "In the event that either party is found to have engaged in fraudulent representation or bad faith negotiations, including but not limited to the deliberate exclusion of rightful stakeholders or the misappropriation of intellectual property, the purchase price shall be subject to automatic adjustment based on independent valuation minus documented damages." Fascinating clause, I observed. I wonder why Sarah insisted on including it. Oh wait, I know exactly why. Because I wrote it. Jake had been doing calculations on his phone, his face growing paler with each figure. If Bell's innovations are removed from the company valuation, if the supply chain system, the financial reforms, the strategic positioning are all considered her intellectual property, Morrison Industries is worth approximately $4.8 million. I finished for him. But that's before we account for the hidden debts you've been accumulating again, Jake. What? Robert's attention snapped to his son. "You said you were clean." "I am," Jake protested. "I've been in recovery for 4 years. I haven't gambled." "No, you haven't gambled," I agreed, pulling up bank records on my laptop. "But you have been taking advances against your expected inheritance. $300,000 for your house renovation, $150,000 for your boat, $75,000 for Emma's failed boutique that she never told you about." "You knew about the boutique?" Emma gasped. "I know about everything," I said simply. including the fact that you've been using Morrison Industries credit lines to float your personal expenses, hiding them in marketing budgets and expense accounts. Current total approximately $600,000 in unauthorized expenditures. Marcus was adding figures rapidly. Combined with Jake's advances and the company's existing debt load that puts Morrison Industries at nearly $6 million in undisclosed liabilities. Which means, I said, watching their faces as understanding dawned, under the terms of the agreement you signed, you would actually owe Everest Holdings $1.2 million to complete the sale at the adjusted valuation. This is extortion, Linda said weakly. This is mathematics, I corrected, and consequences. You tried to steal my birthright claim credit for my work and exile me from the family business. Instead, you've signed a contract that exposes every financial impropriety you've committed. Patricia's phone buzzed with incoming messages. She glanced at it and paled. The live stream, someone screen recorded it. It's being shared on social media. The business community is watching. Everyone knows. Robert grabbed the phone from her, seeing his professional reputation dissolve in real time. Comments poured in from business associates, competitors, and community members who'd respected the Morrison family name. The words fraud, disgrace, and shameful appeared repeatedly. Make it stop, he pleaded, looking at me with desperation. You've made your point. We were wrong. Just make it stop. I can't stop the truth, I said, but I can offer you a path forward. I returned to my laptop, pulling up a new set of documents. Fortunately for you, I've prepared an alternative to complete financial destruction. Call it my Thanksgiving gift to the family that tried to destroy me. Emma laughed bitterly. Your gift? Haven't you humiliated us enough? Humiliation wasn't my goal, I said firmly. Education was. And if you've learned the lessons, then maybe we can salvage something from this disaster. I turned to Jake first. Your gambling addiction stems from a need to prove yourself to be the big winner Dad always expected you to be. But you've been in recovery for 4 years, and that takes more strength than any business deal. I've seen your gamblers' anonymous attendance records, every week without fail, even when traveling for business. Jake's eyes widened. How did you... Your sponsor, Mike Brennan, is the brother of Thomas Brennan, whose steel company I saved from a similar situation. He told me how dedicated you've been to recovery, how you've sponsored 3 other people yourself. That's the Jake who deserves to be part of Morrison Industries' future. I turned to Emma next. Your insecurity about being seen as just a pretty face has driven you to claim achievements that weren't yours. But do you know what Sarah told me? When you thought you were implementing your supply chain system, you actually improved on it. Your modifications to the customer interface increased user satisfaction by 30%. You have real talent, Emma. You just never believed it. Emma's tears had started again, but these seemed different. You were watching, the whole time. Every step, I confirmed. And despite everything, I was proud when you succeeded. Even if you were succeeding with stolen tools, you were still building something. Finally, I faced my parents. You raised 3 children who each became desperate for your approval in different ways. Jake gambled to be the big winner you'd admire. Emma stole credit to be the business genius you'd respect. And I exiled myself to save the family while letting you think I'd abandoned it. What does that say about how we were raised? Linda covered her face with her hands. We just wanted you all to succeed. No, I said gently but firmly. You wanted us to succeed on your terms in ways that reflected well on you. When I chose a different path, you saw it as rejection instead of growth. When Jake struggled with addiction, you saw weakness instead of illness. When Emma felt inadequate, you reinforced it instead of building her confidence. So what now? Robert asked, his voice barely a whisper. You own us. The contracts are signed. You hold all the cards. I stood and walked to the portrait of Grandfather Morrison hanging on the wall. His stern face looked down at us, but I'd always seen kindness in his eyes that others missed. Grandfather used to tell me that the strongest steel goes through the hottest fire, I said, touching the frame gently. He built Morrison Industries not to make money but to create something the family could build together. We failed that vision spectacularly, but failure doesn't have to be final. I returned to the table, pulling up the alternative proposal I'd drafted months ago, hoping I'd never need to use it, but preparing for the worst. Option 1. We proceed with the sale as structured. Everest Holdings takes possession of Morrison Industries. You face financial ruin and public disgrace. The family shatters permanently. Option 2, Jake asked hopefully. Option 2 is harder, I warned. It requires admitting every mistake, accepting responsibility for every betrayal, and committing to real change. Not just words, but actions. Not just promises, but legally binding agreements. I displayed the restructuring plan on the screen. It was comprehensive, covering everything from corporate governance to family therapy requirements. Morrison Industries becomes a subsidiary of Everest Holdings, but remains operationally independent. The family stays involved, but under professional oversight. Jake continues as operations manager, but reports to an independent board and continues his recovery program. Emma becomes marketing director, her actual title matching her actual skills, while taking night classes in business administration. And us, Linda asked quietly. You and Dad step back to advisory roles. You'll have income and influence, but not control. Most importantly, you'll be required to attend family counseling sessions with a therapist who specializes in family business dynamics. Dr. Elizabeth Sterling, who's worked with 8 of my portfolio companies to heal similar fractures. That's humiliating, Robert protested. That's healing, I corrected. And it's not negotiable. Every Everest Holdings acquisition includes mental health support as part of the transition. Healthy families build healthy businesses. Marcus raised his hand tentatively. What about the legal implications, the contracts that have already been signed? I've had my legal team prepare amendments, I said, showing a new set of documents. They can be executed tonight, replacing the original purchase agreement, but everyone has to agree. One holdout, and we proceed with option 1. And you, Emma asked, what's your role in this new structure? I'll be CEO of Morrison Industries, reporting to myself as CEO of Everest Holdings, I said. I'll implement the systems I've been developing for 5 years openly this time. You'll learn from me directly instead of through subterfuge, and maybe eventually we can remember what it means to be a family instead of competitors. The room fell silent again as they absorbed the proposal. It offered salvation, but at the cost of their pride. It promised redemption, but required admitting their sins. It gave them a future, but one where they no longer controlled their destiny. There's one more thing, I added, pulling out a final document. This is a forensic audit I commissioned 6 months ago. It details every financial impropriety, every embezzlement, every fraudulent expense report filed in the last 5 years. If we proceed with option 2, this gets sealed and destroyed. If not, it goes to the authorities tomorrow. That's blackmail, Marcus protested. That's leverage, I corrected. The same kind you tried to use when documenting my absences. The difference is my leverage is based on truth, not manipulation. The grandfather clock chimed 9 times. I'd been here for 3 hours, but it felt like a lifetime. Everything had changed, and yet we still sat at the same table where we'd shared countless meals as a family. You have 1 hour to decide, I announced, gathering my documents. I'll be in grandfather's study. You can discuss among yourselves, call lawyers, check my claims, whatever you need to do. But at 10 o'clock, I need an answer. Option 1 or option 2, destruction or redemption. Your choice. I stood to leave, but Jake's voice stopped me. Belle, why option 2? After everything we've done, why offer us any mercy at all? I looked at him then, at each of them, seeing not the people who'd betrayed me, but the family I'd once loved, and despite everything still did. Because grandfather believed in second chances, I said simply, and because I refuse to let his legacy die with your greed. Morrison Industries will survive either way. The question is whether the Morrison family will survive with it. I left them in the dining room and walked down the hallway to grandfather's study, each step echoing with memories. The door creaked as it always had, and the familiar scent of leather-bound books and pipe tobacco enveloped me, though grandfather had been gone for 5 years. I'd spent countless hours in this room as a child, watching him work, learning the rhythms of business from a man who understood that true success was measured in more than dollars. Behind me, I could hear raised voices beginning to filter through the walls. The family meeting had begun in earnest, and from the sound of it, opinions were deeply divided. I settled into grandfather's chair, running my fingers along the worn armrests where his hands had rested for decades, and waited. Through the door, Jake's voice rose above the others. "She's right about everything. We tried to steal from her, and she's offering to save us anyway. She's manipulating us." Emma countered, her voice shrill with panic. "This whole thing is a power play. She wants to humiliate us into submission." "We humiliated ourselves," Jake shot back. Belle just held up a mirror. I pulled out my phone and texted Sarah Chen, "Stage 1 complete. Prepare the transition team for either scenario." Her response was immediate. "Legal standing by. Dr. Sterling has cleared her schedule for emergency family intervention if needed. The board of advisors is assembled and ready for video conference." I'd planned for every contingency, but I found myself hoping they'd choose redemption over ruin. Despite everything, the little girl who'd planted tomatoes with grandfather still wanted her family whole. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from David Chen at Meridian Capital. "Belle, I'm watching the social media explosion. Are you all right?" "I'm exactly where I need to be," I assured him. "Thank you for believing in me when this was just a wild idea from a desperate analyst." "You've exceeded every projection," David said. "But I know this isn't about the money for you. Your family is currently deciding whether to accept salvation or choose destruction. I've given them 1 hour. And if they choose poorly..." I looked at grandfather's portrait on the study wall, a smaller version of the one in the dining room. "Then Morrison Industries becomes just another Everest Holdings subsidiary, and I build my family in the companies I save instead of the one I was born into." After ending the call, I opened my laptop to review the transition plans one more time. Option 1 was clean and simple, full acquisition family buyout at the adjusted price, complete severance of ties. Option 2 was messier but more hopeful, a complex restructuring that would take months to implement and years to fully realize. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called. Jake entered, closing the door behind him. He looked haggard, older than his 32 years, but there was something different in his eyes. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that might have been genuine humility. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Just us like we used to." I gestured to the chair across from the desk. "The family gave you permission to negotiate." "The family is in chaos," he admitted, sinking into the chair. "Dad's having what might be a nervous breakdown. Mom's calling every lawyer in her contacts. Emma's trying to find loopholes in your documentation. Marcus is explaining why none exist. And Patricia is fielding calls from reporters who want statements about the live stream disaster. And you," Jake met my eyes directly. "I'm tired of living a lie, tired of pretending I'm something I'm not, tired of competing for approval that never comes." He pulled out his Gambler's Anonymous coin, running his thumb over the worn surface. "You know what I realized in recovery? The gambling was never about money. It was about trying to win big enough that Dad would finally see me as more than a disappointment." "He never said you were a disappointment," I offered gently. "He never had to," Jake replied. "Every time he talked about you, his voice changed. Belle's so sharp. Belle understands numbers like her grandfather. Belle's going places. Even when you left, even when he was planning to disinherit you, there was pride in his anger, like you'd proven his point by succeeding without him. And Emma's worse off than me," Jake sighed. "At least I had addiction to blame. She's been living with imposter syndrome her entire life, stealing achievements because she can't believe she could earn any on her own. Do you know she cried when you mentioned her improvements to the supply chain system? First time anyone's ever suggested she had an original thought worth noting. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind we'd shared as children when the world got too complicated and we'd hide in this very room. "I'm sorry," Jake said finally. "Not the kind of sorry you say when you're caught, but really sorry. You saved my life, Belle. Not just the company or my reputation, but my actual life. I was so deep in debt to dangerous people. If you hadn't covered it, I don't know what would have happened." "I know exactly what would have happened," I said quietly. "That's why I did it. And I repaid you by helping them plan your exile." Jake's voice broke. "By documenting your absence, building their case against you all while knowing you were gone because of me. What kind of brother does that—" "A human one," I replied, "flawed and selfish and capable of change. The question is, what kind of brother do you want to be now?" Jake leaned forward, his hands clasped. "I want option 2. I'll do whatever it takes. The oversight, the reporting structure, continuing therapy, all of it. I've spent 4 years in recovery learning that accountability isn't punishment. It's freedom. And the others—" "I'll convince them," Jake said with determination. "Or at least I'll try. But Belle, I need to know something first. Could you really send us to prison, destroy the family completely?" I considered the question carefully. "Yes," I said finally. "If you chose to continue down the path of destruction, I would let you face the consequences, not out of vengeance, but because sometimes people need to hit bottom before they can rebuild. Ask any recovering addict." Jake nodded slowly. "That's what I told them, that you're offering us intervention before we hit bottom, that this is mercy, not manipulation." Another knock interrupted us. This time it was Emma, her tear-stained face showing the ravages of the evening's revelations. "Can I come in?" Jake started to leave, but I motioned for him to stay. "We're family. Let's stop having secrets." Emma entered hesitantly, as if the study itself might judge her. She'd removed her designer heels and looked smaller, younger, more like the little sister who used to beg me to braid her hair. "I hate you," she said without preamble, then immediately burst into fresh tears. "No, that's not true. I hate that you're right. I hate that you've been watching me fail and steal and pretend. I hate that you let me do it." "I didn't let you do anything," I corrected. "I gave you opportunities to succeed or fail on your own merits. The fact that you improved the supply chain system, that was all you, Emma. I couldn't have predicted that innovation. I wouldn't have thought of it." "Stop being nice to me," Emma sobbed. "I don't deserve it. I've been horrible to you for years. Even before this whole disinheritance plot, I resented you. Perfect Belle with her perfect grades and her perfect plans." "I was never perfect," I said. "I was terrified. Terrified of failing grandfather's legacy. Terrified of Jake's addiction destroying us. Terrified of Mom and Dad's expectations. I ran to California not out of ambition, but out of fear. The only difference between us is that my fear drove me to build something while yours drove you to tear things down." Emma collapsed into another chair, looking between Jake and me. "How are you sitting here offering us hope after what we did? We literally planned to destroy you. There were meetings, Belle. Actual meetings where we discussed how to hurt you most effectively. Dad suggested the $10,000 bequest specifically because he knew it would feel like a slap in the face." "I know," I said simply. "I've seen the meeting minutes." "And you still want us in your life?" "I want the family we could have been," I clarified. "The one where Jake's recovery is celebrated instead of hidden, where Emma's actual talents are nurtured instead of her insecurities, where Mom and Dad learn that love isn't conditional on compliance. That family might still be possible, but only if everyone chooses to build it." The study door burst open without a knock. Robert stood there, his face flushed and breathing heavy. Behind him, Linda clutched Marcus's arm for support. "You've destroyed us," Robert accused, pointing a shaking finger at me. "That live stream has gone viral. I've had 17 calls from business associates canceling contracts. Our reputation is ruined. Your reputation for integrity was ruined the moment you chose betrayal over family. I responded calmly. The live stream just made it public. But reputations can be rebuilt, Dad. The question is whether you want to rebuild on a foundation of lies or truth. This is all your fault, Linda interjected. If you'd just stayed with the family business like you were supposed to, then Jake's embezzlement would have been discovered during the audit. He'd be in prison, the company would have folded, and we'd have nothing. I finished. Is that the alternate history you prefer? Marcus cleared his throat. I've been on the phone with my partners. From a legal standpoint, option 2 is remarkably generous. The restructuring terms are more favorable than any bankruptcy court would offer, and the personal protection from criminal prosecution is substantial. You mean we're criminals, Robert said flatly. You mean you've made criminal choices, I corrected. Fraud, embezzlement, intellectual property theft, conspiracy to commit financial harm. Should I continue? I've had enough, Patricia announced from the doorway. She held up her phone, showing a recording app. I've been documenting everything tonight. Every confession, every revelation, every crime admitted to. I came here planning to record Belle's humiliation, and instead, I've recorded yours. The room tensed, everyone turning to stare at Patricia with fresh horror. Relax, she continued. I'm deleting it. All of it. You want to know why? She looked at me with something approaching respect. Because in all the years I've watched this family's drama, tonight's the first time I've seen real love. Twisted and buried under greed and ego, but love nonetheless. Belle could destroy you all, and instead she's offering salvation. That's worth more than any gossip or social media views. She made a show of deleting the recordings, then looked at Robert and Linda. You have 30 minutes left to decide. I suggest you spend them wisely. As Patricia left, the family stood in awkward formation in grandfather's study. 5 people bound by blood and betrayal, standing at a crossroads that would define their future. Tell us about option 2. Robert said finally, his voice defeated. Tell us exactly what accepting your offer means. I returned to my laptop, pulling up the detailed restructuring plan. It means admitting that the way we've operated as a family is broken and committing to fix it. It means accepting that love and business can coexist, but only with proper boundaries and accountability. It means choosing humility over pride, growth over stagnation, and family over fortune. And if we refuse, Linda asked quietly, then at 10 o'clock I call my lawyers and we proceed with the original acquisition. You'll receive the adjusted purchase price minus debts, which means you'll owe Everest Holdings money. The forensic audit goes to the authorities. Criminal investigations begin. The family fractures permanently, and Morrison Industries becomes just another company in my portfolio. Show us the papers, Robert said, sounding every one of his 62 years. Show us what choosing salvation looks like. As I pulled up the restructuring documents on my laptop, the study door opened one more time. Patricia re-entered, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood 3 people whose presence made my family gasp in collective shock. Walter Fitzgerald, my grandfather's best friend and former business partner, entered first. At 78, he moved with the careful dignity of age, but his mind remained sharp as the steel Morrison Industries had once forged. Theodore Morrison, my father's younger brother who'd been estranged from the family for a decade, followed close behind. And finally, Jennifer Martinez, whose presence made Jake go pale with recognition. Hello, Robert. Walter said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd helped build Morrison Industries from its foundation. Belle asked us to be here for this moment. She thought you might need to hear some truths from voices other than hers. Walter, my father stammered. Ted, what are you doing here? Setting the record straight. Theodore replied, his resemblance to my father striking despite the 10-year age gap. Something I should have done years ago. Jennifer Martinez stepped forward, her federal investigator's badge visible on her hip. Mr. Morrison, I'm Special Agent Martinez with the Securities and Exchange Commission. I'm here in an unofficial capacity at Ms. Morrison's request, but I think you should know that we've been monitoring Morrison Industries for the past 18 months. Monitoring? Linda's voice cracked. For what? Securities fraud, initially, Jennifer replied calmly. We received anonymous tips about financial irregularities. What we found was interesting. A pattern of embezzlement that was systematically covered up intellectual property theft, being disguised as internal innovation, and what appeared to be preparation for fraudulent asset transfer. But every investigation led to the same conclusion. She continued looking at me with professional respect. Someone was protecting Morrison Industries from itself. Every time criminal activity reached a threshold that would trigger federal intervention, it was mysteriously resolved. Funds appeared from untraceable sources. Stolen innovations were retroactively documented. It was like watching a guardian angel with a very good understanding of securities law. That was you, Emma said to me, understanding dawning. You've been protecting us from prison this entire time. I've been protecting Morrison Industries, I clarified. The family was collateral benefit. Walter moved to grandfather's portrait, touching the frame with gnarled fingers. Harrison Morrison would be spinning in his grave if he saw what you've become, Robert. He built this company on principles of integrity and family unity. You've perverted both. You don't understand, Robert protested. The pressure of maintaining the legacy, the competition, the changing markets. I understand perfectly, Walter interrupted. I was there when Harrison started with nothing but a truck and determination. I watched him face bankruptcy 3 times and never once compromise his ethics. You had every advantage he fought to give you, and you squandered it on pride and greed. Theodore stepped forward, his expression mixing anger with pity. Do you want to know why I really left the family business, Robert? Why I haven't spoken to you in a decade? My father's jaw tightened. You said you wanted to pursue other interests. I left because I discovered you were planning to force me out, Theodore revealed. I found the documents you'd prepared with the previous family lawyer, the ones that would have diluted my shares to nothing. Sound familiar? Belle isn't the first family member you've tried to exile. She's just the first one smart enough to see it coming and strong enough to fight back. That's not... We never... Linda's protest died as she saw the truth in Theodore's eyes. I have the documents, Theodore said simply. I've kept them all these years, wondering if I should have fought back, watching from afar as you poisoned Jake with impossible expectations and Emma with casual cruelty. But I was a coward. I took my buyout and ran. Belle didn't run. She stayed and fought for all of you, even as you sharpened your knives for her back. Walter pulled out a manila envelope, aged and worn. Harrison left more than one letter, Robert. This one was for me to be shared when the family had lost its way. Would you like to hear your father's words? Robert nodded mutely, sinking into a chair as Walter opened the letter with reverent care. My dear Walter. Walter read his voice, taking on the cadence of my grandfather's speech. If you're reading this, then my fears have come to pass. I've watched my son Robert grow harder with each passing year, mistaking ruthlessness for strength and seeing family as competition rather than foundation. I pray I'm wrong, but if the family business survives, it will likely be despite him, not because of him. My father flinched as if physically struck. Walter continued reading. I see hope in my grandchildren, particularly young Belle, who has her grandmother's heart and my head for numbers. If the family turns on itself, as families drunk on success often do, look to her for salvation. She has the rare gift of seeing strength in mercy and opportunity in crisis. The others may try to destroy her for it. Don't let them. Morrison Industries was built on love, Walter. If that love dies better, the company die with it than persist as a monument to greed. He knew, Robert whispered. He knew what I'd become. He knew what you were choosing to become, Walter corrected. There's a difference. Even now, Belle is offering you a choice. The question is whether you've finally learned enough to make the right one. I opened a new folder on my laptop, one I'd hoped never to need. There's more you should know. The full truth about the last 5 years, documented and verified. The screen filled with a timeline of events, each entry supported by documents, photos, and correspondence. Jake's face crumbled as he saw the full extent of his gambling losses displayed in stark detail. $800,000 had been just the beginning. The total approached $2 million before I'd intervened. "The Torelli crime family had a contract on you, Jake," I said quietly. $100,000 marker you couldn't pay. I negotiated with them through intermediaries, paid them in installments, and got them to agree to leave you alone. You never knew because I made sure you never knew. Your recovery couldn't handle that kind of pressure. Jake buried his face in his hands. $2 million. You paid $2 million to save me. I invested $2 million in my brother's life, I corrected. Worth every penny. The timeline shifted to Emma's failures, each one documented with brutal honesty. The boutique that failed, the marketing campaigns that flopped, the improvements she'd claimed as her own that had actually made things worse before I quietly fixed them. Every mistake covered up, every failure transformed into success. I narrated. Not to enable you, Emma, but to give you room to learn without destroying your confidence completely. Dr. Sterling calls it scaffolded growth, supporting someone while they learn to stand on their own. "I've been a fraud," Emma said hollowly. "Everything I thought I achieved—" "Look at entry 47, I instructed. March of this year, you modified the customer service protocol without any input from me. Satisfaction scores increased 15%. That was all you. Entry 52, you caught a pricing error that would have cost us $300,000. Entry 58, your social media campaign brought in 12 new enterprise clients. You have talent, Emma. You just couldn't see it through the fog of insecurity." The timeline shifted again, this time to my parents' decisions over the years. Each strategic blunder, each near catastrophe, each moment when ego overruled wisdom. The Pemberton acquisition Dad nearly made would have bankrupted us within 6 months, I explained. They were laundering money for a Mexican cartel. The FBI raided them 2 weeks after you walked away. The Jow manufacturing deal would have locked us into a partnership with a company using slave labor. The cannabis packaging expansion Jake pushed. The federal regulations I leaked were real. That market collapsed 3 months later. "How did you know?" Linda asked faintly. "How could you possibly know all this?" "Because while you were planning my exile, I was studying every market we touched, every company we considered, every opportunity and threat on the horizon," I replied. "Everest Holdings' success isn't luck or magic. It's the result of obsessive preparation and actually caring about due diligence beyond the surface numbers." Jennifer Martinez spoke up again. "I can confirm that Morrison Industries came within days of federal investigation on 3 separate occasions. Each time the issues were resolved just before we would have been forced to act. Ms. Morrison's intervention saved you from criminal prosecution, asset forfeiture, and personal bankruptcy. There's one more thing," I said, navigating to a folder marked Daniel. "Emma, I know about your relationship with Daniel Chen. I've known for 8 months. Emma went rigid. "You, what?" I pulled up a series of emails and text messages. "Daniel approached me before pursuing you. He wanted my blessing, or at least my ignorance. I told him I already knew you'd been attracted to him when we dated. I also told him that if he hurt you, Everest Holdings would destroy his startup. He chose to proceed. The betrayal was fake." Emma's voice rose to a near shriek. "You let me think I was stealing your boyfriend." "I let you think you were making a choice," I corrected. "Daniel and I were never right for each other, but he genuinely cares for you, Emma. That's why he's waiting in his car outside, hoping you'll forgive him for his part in tonight's deception." "He's here." With a ring in his pocket, I confirmed. He wanted to propose after Thanksgiving dinner, but the live stream disaster made him reconsider. He's been texting me all evening, asking if he should leave or stay. What should I tell him? Emma looked around the room at her shattered family, her exposed secrets, her failed schemes. Then she looked at me, really looked at me perhaps for the first time in years. "Tell him to wait," she said finally. "I have a family to help save first." Theodore cleared his throat. "Robert, Linda, you have 15 minutes to make your decision. I'll be joining Bell's Board of Advisors if you choose option 2. Someone needs to make sure you don't fall back into old patterns." "As will I," Walter added. "Harrison asked me to look after his family. I failed him once by letting you drive Theodore away. I won't fail him again." "And I'll be monitoring compliance with any agreement," Jennifer stated. "Officially or unofficially, depending on your choice. The SEC has a long memory, and Bell won't be able to protect you forever if you choose to continue down a criminal path." I stood gathering my composure for one final revelation. There's something else. Something I didn't include in the timeline because it's not about protection or business or money. I pulled out a small key from my pocket, one I'd carried for 5 years. Grandfather left me something besides a letter. He left me a safety deposit box with instructions to open it only when the family had either found its way or lost it completely. I think tonight qualifies as one or the other. From my bag, I retrieved a small metal box and used the key to open it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, spanning decades of Morrison family history. Christmases, birthdays, company, picnics, quiet moments of genuine joy captured on film. "He wanted me to remember," I said, spreading the photos across the desk, "to remember what we were before we became what we are. Look at these faces. Look at how we used to love each other before money and power poisoned everything." My family gathered around the desk, drawn despite themselves to the images of happier times. Jake picked up a photo of us as children building sandcastles at the cabin by the lake. Emma found one of her first dance recital with the whole family beaming in the audience. My parents discovered their wedding photo tucked between images of their children's births and family celebrations. "This is what we're really deciding tonight," I said softly. "Not just about Morrison Industries or money or reputation. We're deciding whether the family in these photos can exist again or whether it dies forever. You have 10 minutes to choose." As they absorbed the weight of that choice, I noticed Patricia had her phone out again, but this time she wasn't recording. She was looking at a photo on her screen, one of her own family that she'd lost to similar greed and dysfunction. "Choose wisely," she said quietly. "Some chances only come once." The grandfather clock in the hallway began its countdown to 10 o'clock, each tick a reminder that time for decision was running out. The Morrison family stood at the precipice with only minutes to decide whether to fall or fly. The grandfather clock had just finished chiming 9:30 when the doorbell rang, cutting through the tension like a blade. We all froze, looking at each other with the wariness of conspirators caught mid-plot. "I'll get it," Patricia offered, seemingly grateful for any excuse to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the study. Moments later, she returned with 3 more unexpected visitors, and the night's revelations were far from over. First came David Chen from Meridian Capital, my former boss and first investor, his usually immaculate suit showing signs of hasty travel. Behind him walked Margaret Sullivan, an elegant woman in her 60s, who carried herself with quiet authority. And finally, Thomas Brennan, still wearing his work clothes from the steel mill, his presence both incongruous and somehow perfect in my grandfather's study. "Forgive the intrusion," David said, nodding to my family. "Bell told us to wait until 9:30 before joining. We've been at the coffee shop down the street watching the social media explosion." "More witnesses to our humiliation?" Robert asked bitterly. "More testimony to Bell's character." Margaret corrected her voice, carrying the crisp accent of old Boston money. "I'm Margaret Sullivan, CEO of Sullivan Trust. We manage approximately $2 billion in family office assets. Bell approached me 18 months ago with a proposal that seemed too altruistic to be real. Now I understand why." Thomas Brennan stepped forward, his calloused hands a stark contrast to the manicured fingers around him. "I'm Tom Brennan. My family owned Brennan Steelworks until gambling addiction nearly destroyed us. Bell saved more than our company. She saved our family. When she called saying she might need character witnesses tonight, I drove 3 hours to be here." "Character witnesses?" Linda echoed faintly. "For the family intervention," David explained. "Belle knew this moment would come. She's been preparing support systems for months, hoping you'd choose rehabilitation over destruction. We're here to tell you what that choice looks like from the other side." Walter gestured for everyone to sit, though there weren't enough chairs for the crowd now assembled in Grandfather's study. Some leaned against the built-in bookshelves, others stood near the windows. It felt like a tribunal, but one focused on healing rather than judgment. "Tell them about Brennan Steele," Belle prompted Thomas gently. Thomas rubbed his weathered face, gathering his thoughts. 4 generations of Brennans worked that mill. My great-grandfather started it with nothing but determination and a small loan from a local bank, built it into the biggest employer in our county. Then I discovered online poker. His voice carried the weight of hard-won self-awareness. Started small, $20 buy-ins during lunch breaks. Within 2 years, I was betting the payroll, mortgaged the family home 3 times. My wife found out when our daughter's college fund disappeared overnight. $800,000 gone just like that. Jake shifted uncomfortably, recognizing his own story in Thomas's words. "My brothers wanted to kill me literally," Thomas continued. "My father, 78 years old, came out of retirement to try to save what I'd destroyed. We were 3 days from bankruptcy when Belle's offer came through Everest Holdings. But it wasn't just money she offered." "What else?" Emma asked quietly. "Dignity." Thomas replied simply. "She could have bought us for pennies and stripped the assets. Instead, she paid fair value and kept everyone employed. But the real gift was the requirement for therapy, individual family group sessions. My brothers had to attend anger management. My wife and I had to do couples counseling. The whole family had to learn to communicate without screaming." "And now," Robert prompted despite himself, "Brennan Steele is thriving. My brother Michael runs operations. I work the floor like my grandfather did honest work for honest pay. My daughter graduated debt-free because Belle restructured our personal loans as part of the deal. And every Thursday night, I sponsor other gambling addicts, including 3 business owners Belle has sent my way." Margaret Sullivan spoke next. "I met Belle when she came seeking investment capital. Most 28-year-olds pitch get-rich-quick schemes or tech disruptions. Belle pitched something revolutionary, saving family businesses from themselves. Her model wasn't about maximum profit extraction. It was about sustainable regeneration." "Pretty words," Robert said dismissively, "but business is about returns." "Indeed," Margaret smiled, "which is why I was skeptical until I saw her results. Everest Holdings portfolio companies don't just survive Mr. Morrison, they flourish. Employee satisfaction scores average 85%. Community impact metrics are off the charts. And financially, her returns exceed traditional private equity by 30%. How Marcus asked his legal mind engaged, despite the circumstances. "Because healed families don't sabotage their own success," Margaret explained. "They don't embezzle funds or waste energy on internal warfare. They focus on growth and innovation. Belle discovered that investing in psychological health yields better returns than any financial engineering." David Chen pulled out his tablet showing charts and graphs. "I've watched Belle build Everest Holdings from conception. Every decision, every acquisition, every intervention has been leading to this moment. Morrison Industries wasn't just another target. It was the reason for everything." "What do you mean?" Linda asked. "She told me from day one," David revealed. "She said, I need to build something big enough to save my family's business when they inevitably destroy it. I thought she was being dramatic. Now I see she was being prophetic." Jennifer Martinez, who'd been quietly observing, added her perspective. "From a regulatory standpoint, Everest Holdings is the cleanest operation I've ever investigated. And yes, I did investigate thoroughly. What I found was a company that proactively addresses issues before they become crimes. They've prevented more SEC violations than most compliance departments even catch. But the most impressive part, she continued looking directly at Robert, is the paper trail of protection around Morrison Industries. Every time you nearly committed securities fraud, Everest Holdings mysteriously made moves that forced you to reconsider. Every time Jake's past threatened to resurface, potential problems disappeared. Every time Emma's fabrications could have led to lawsuits, documentation would appear to provide legal cover. "She's been our guardian angel," Emma whispered. "More like your guardian CEO," Theodore corrected. "Angels work on faith. Belle worked with spreadsheets and strategic planning." The doorbell rang again. Patricia, now functioning as an impromptu doorwoman, went to answer it. She returned with someone who made Emma gasp and Jake groan, Dr. Elizabeth Sterling, the family therapist Belle had mentioned. "I apologize for arriving early," Dr. Sterling said, her calm presence immediately shifting the room's energy. "But given the livestream situation, I thought it might be helpful to begin our work immediately should the family choose that path." "You brought a therapist to Thanksgiving dinner," Robert asked me incredulously. "I brought hope," I corrected. "Dr. Sterling has worked with 7 of my portfolio companies. She specializes in the intersection of family dynamics and business dysfunction. Her success rate is remarkable." "If I may," Dr. Sterling interjected, "I've been briefed on the situation. The patterns I see here are textbook parentification of children's success measured only in financial terms, love conditioned on compliance and identity formation, corrupted by impossible expectations. These patterns are treatable, but only with complete commitment to change." "What would that look like?" Linda asked hesitantly. "Twice weekly family sessions for the first 6 months." Dr. Sterling outlined. "Individual therapy for each family member to address personal issues, group workshops on communication boundary setting, and healthy conflict resolution. It's intensive, but transformation requires intensity." Jake suddenly stood moving to the window. "We're running out of time. It's 9:45. He turned to face our parents. "Mom, Dad, I need you to hear something. Really hear it, not just deflect it like you always do." He took a deep breath, 4 years of recovery giving him strength. "You broke us, all 3 of us. You created a family where love had to be earned through achievement, where failure meant rejection, where success was never enough because there was always someone doing better. Do you know why I started gambling? Because the high of winning was the only time I felt like I might finally be good enough for you." "That's not fair," Robert protested. "Isn't it?" Jake challenged. "When I got into MIT, you said, why not Harvard like Belle? When I made VP of Operations, you asked when I'd be president. When I brought home Sarah Whitmore, you wondered why I couldn't find someone from a better family. Nothing was ever enough, so I tried to win big enough to finally impress you. Instead, I nearly destroyed everything." Emma joined him at the window. "I was worse. I knew I'd never be as smart as Belle or as ambitious as Jake, so I became the pretty one, the social one, the one who could at least make you look good at parties. But that wasn't enough either. You'd introduce me as our Emma, she's trying to find herself. Like I was a permanent disappointment. So I started stealing accomplishments hoping manufactured success would finally make you see me as more than decoration. We loved you all equally," Linda insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "No," I said firmly. "You loved the versions of us you wanted us to be. When we deviated from your script, love became disappointment. When we exceeded expectations, love became pride in your parenting. But unconditional love, the kind that survives failure and celebrates growth, that was as foreign to this family as speaking Mandarin." Walter Fitzgerald moved to the center of the room. Harrison Morrison wasn't perfect. He could be hard, demanding, sometimes impossible. But he understood something you've forgotten, Robert. He knew that family and business could strengthen each other, but only if family came first. The business was supposed to serve the family, not consume it. "Easy for you to say," Robert shot back. "You weren't carrying the weight of his legacy." "I carried my own," Walter replied. And I made my own mistakes. But I never sacrificed my children on the altar of success. That's a uniquely Morrison innovation and not one Harrison would have approved. Patricia, still holding her phone, suddenly spoke up. The live stream recording has been viewed over 100,000 times. The comments are interesting. Most support Belle, but there's a significant thread developing about family businesses and generational trauma. Professors are already discussing using this as a case study. Wonderful, Robert said sarcastically. We're now a cautionary tale for business schools. You were always going to be a case study, I said. The question was whether it would be about failure or redemption. That choice is still yours with 8 minutes remaining. Thomas Brennan stepped forward. Can I share something? My family chose redemption. It wasn't easy. Those first therapy sessions were brutal. 40 years of resentment and pain don't disappear overnight. My brothers said things that cut deep. I had to hear how my addiction had affected everyone, not just financially, but emotionally. My daughter told me she used to lie about what her father did for a living because she was ashamed. His voice cracked, but he continued. But we kept going. Week after week, session after session, and slowly something shifted. We stopped being enemies who shared blood and started being family again. Last month, my grandson was born. They named him Thomas after me. Not the gambling addict who nearly destroyed everything, but the man who found the courage to change. That's what redemption looks like. Margaret Sullivan added, from an investment perspective, the families that choose Belle's path show remarkable returns, not just financially, but in metrics that actually matter. Health improves when stress decreases. Creativity flourishes when fear of failure diminishes. Innovation accelerates when people feel safe to take risks. The families that go through this process don't just survive, they evolve. 5 minutes. Jake announced, his voice tight with anxiety. Mom, Dad, please. We've lost so much already. Don't let pride cost us our last chance. Dr. Sterling spoke gently. If I may observe something, the fact that you're all still here, still listening, still engaging suggests that beneath the pain and betrayal, love still exists. Dysfunctional love, perhaps. Misdirected and conditional love, certainly. But love nonetheless. That's a foundation we can build on if you're willing. And if we're not? Robert asked, though his defiance was weakening. Jennifer Martinez answered with professional detachment. Then tomorrow morning I file my report with the SEC. The forensic audit Belle compiled provides sufficient evidence for a full investigation. Asset freezing, criminal charges, public trial. The Morrison name won't just be tarnished. It will become synonymous with corporate fraud and family betrayal. That seems harsh, Linda protested. That's justice, Jennifer corrected. Belle has been preventing justice for years to protect you. If you reject her offer, that protection ends. Theodore moved closer to his brother. Robert, I've watched from a distance for 10 years, watched you grow harder, colder, more obsessed with control. Watched Linda enable it because challenging you was scarier than watching your children suffer. This is your moment of choice, not just for the business, but for your soul. 2 minutes, Jake said quietly. Emma suddenly grabbed the restructuring documents from my laptop, scanning them with desperate intensity. The terms are more than fair. We keep our positions, but with oversight. We maintain income, but lose absolute control. We get therapy instead of prison. How is this even a question? Because it means admitting we were wrong. Robert said finally, his voice barely audible. Admitting that I became the kind of man my father would have despised. Admitting that I valued money over my own children. Admitting that I need help. Yes, I said simply. It means admitting all of that. But admission is the first step to healing. And healing is the only path to the family we could have been. 1 minute, Jake announced. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. 11 people crowded into a study meant for quiet contemplation, waiting for 2 broken parents to choose between pride and redemption. Linda reached for Robert's hand. They looked at each other, 40 years of marriage condensed into a single moment of decision. I saw in their faces the young couple from grandfather's photos before ambition curdled into obsession, before love became conditional, before they lost themselves in the pursuit of more. 30 seconds, Jake whispered. Robert looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in years, not as the daughter who defied him or the obstacle to his plans, but as the woman who'd sacrificed everything to save a family that had betrayed her. His eyes filled with tears he'd probably been suppressing for decades. "Where do we sign?" he asked brokenly. The clock began to chime 10 o'clock as I pulled out the restructuring agreements already prepared with signature lines and witness blocks. My hands remained steady as I placed them before my parents, but my heart was racing with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The real work was just beginning. As my parents' pens hovered over the signature lines, I raised my hand to stop them. The clock had finished chiming, but I wasn't ready to let them sign just yet. Too much remained unsaid. Too many details needed clarification. The room held its collective breath as I pulled the documents back. "Before you sign," I said carefully, "we need to discuss exactly what you're agreeing to. This isn't just a business contract. It's a commitment to fundamental change, and I need to know you understand that." Robert's hand trembled slightly as he set down his pen. "More conditions. Haven't you humiliated us enough?" "This isn't about humiliation," I replied, opening a detailed breakdown of the restructuring terms on my laptop. "It's about ensuring we never end up here again. Dr. Sterling, would you explain the therapeutic requirements?" Dr. Sterling stepped forward, her presence commanding despite her soft voice. "The family therapy component is non-negotiable and legally binding. Twice-weekly sessions for 6 months, then weekly for another 6 months. After that, we assess progress and determine ongoing needs. Missing sessions without medical cause results in financial penalties and potential revision of the business structure." "You're mandating therapy through a legal contract?" Linda asked, incredulous. "I'm mandating healing," I corrected, "because without it, we'll be back here in 5 years or 10 replaying the same destructive patterns. Jake, tell them about your recovery requirements." Jake straightened his shoulders. "I continue with GA meetings twice a week minimum. Monthly check-ins with my sponsor are documented and reported to the board. Any gambling activity, even lottery tickets, triggers immediate suspension from company operations pending review. Random financial audits to ensure no backsliding. And I'm okay with all of it." "Because accountability saved your life," Thomas Brennan added supportively. "Same requirements kept me honest. Still do." Emma looked at the documents with new understanding. "What are my conditions?" "Education and attribution," I outlined. "You're enrolled in an executive MBA program starting in January. The company pays, but you maintain a B average or higher. Every project you lead must have clear documentation of contributions, not just yours, but everyone's. No more stolen credit, but also recognition for your actual achievements." And us, Robert asked his CEO authority reduced to uncertain questions. "You and Mom step back to advisory board positions as discussed. Salary of $500,000 each annually, which is generous for advisory roles. But here's what you didn't know, that salary is contingent on therapeutic progress. Dr. Sterling provides monthly reports. Regression or resistance results in salary reductions." "You're tying our income to therapy." Linda's voice rose. "I'm tying your income to growth," I clarified, "just like you tied our worth to achievement. The difference is this metric actually leads somewhere positive." Marcus had been reviewing the legal framework, his expression growing more complex with each page. "The corporate structure is fascinating. Bell maintains CEO control of Morrison Industries as a subsidiary of Everest Holdings. But there's a pathway for family members to earn back equity stakes based on performance metrics that include both business results and therapeutic progress." "Earn back," Robert seized on the phrase. "It's our company." Theodore corrected his brother. "Was your company. You sold it, remember, to Bell. The fact that she's offering any path back to ownership is more grace than you deserve." Margaret Sullivan pulled up financial projections on her tablet. If I may share the modeling we've done, under traditional acquisition scenarios, Morrison Industries would be gutted, redundancies eliminated, and family members removed within 6 months. Under Bell's structure, the company maintains its identity while gaining access to Everest Holdings' resources and expertise. Projected growth is 40% over 3 years. But only if the family dynamics improve, David Chen added. We've seen this model work 7 times now. The companies where families commit to change see exponential growth. The ones that resist struggle and ultimately get sold off. Bell's offering you a chance to be the former. Patricia, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. I need to say something. I came here tonight to watch your family implode. I've resented your success for years, waited for the mighty Morrisons to fall. But watching Belle operate, seeing how she's turned betrayal into opportunity, I'm ashamed of my pettiness. If you don't take this deal, you're bigger fools than I ever imagined. 45 minutes past the deadline. I noted, looking at my parents. I've extended it because this discussion matters, but I need a decision, not just signatures, but real commitment. Are you willing to do the work? Linda stood suddenly, pacing to the window. The garden lights illuminated the grounds where her children had played, where family barbecues had hosted hundreds of guests, where the Morrison success story had been displayed like a badge of honor. What happens to our social standing? Our friends, our clubs, our reputation? Your real friends will admire your courage to change, Margaret offered. The others weren't friends anyway. As for reputation, would you rather be known as the family that fell from grace or the one that chose redemption? The live stream has already decided that, Jake pointed out. We're either the villains who got our comeuppance or the family brave enough to face our failures. Belle's given us the power to choose which story gets told. Emma had been quiet, absorbing everything, but now she looked directly at me. You mentioned Daniel earlier. Is he really outside? In the driveway, I confirmed. He's been texting me every 10 minutes asking if he should leave. He loves you, Emma, but he's terrified about his role in tonight's deception. You gave him permission to date me as part of some plan. I gave him permission to follow his heart, I corrected. He'd been attracted to you for months, but wouldn't act on it because we dated briefly. I told him the truth that you and I would never work because I saw you as a sister, not a rival. What developed between you two was real. But you monitored it. I monitored everything, I admitted. Not out of malice, but necessity. I needed to know if you were using him to hurt me or if genuine feelings were involved. When I saw it was real, I backed off. The fact that he's still out there in November, cold waiting to know if you'll forgive him, that tells you everything about his feelings. Emma moved toward the door, then stopped. If I sign this, if we all sign, can we really come back from this? Can we really be a family again? Dr. Sterling answered gently. Not the family you were. That family is dead, and frankly, it needed to die. But you can build something new, something healthier. It won't be easy. You'll have to confront years of pain, acknowledge deep wounds, and learn entirely new ways of relating. But yes, you can become a family again, a better one. I've seen it, Thomas added earnestly. My brothers and I went from planning each other's murders, and I mean that literally, to being genuine partners. Last week, my brother Michael's son asked me to be his best man. 5 years ago, he wouldn't let me near his family. Healing is possible. Robert had been silent, studying the contracts with the intensity he once reserved for acquisition targets. Finally, he looked up at me. There's something you haven't told us, something about why you're really doing this. It's not just about saving the company or even the family. What aren't you saying? I met his gaze, steadily recognizing the business acumen that had built Morrison Industries despite his personal failings. You're right. There is something more. Walking to grandfather's desk, I opened a drawer I'd discovered during my childhood explorations. Inside, wrapped in aged cloth, was a small leather journal. Grandfather's private thoughts, never meant for other eyes, but left where he knew I'd eventually find them. Grandfather knew about your father. I told Robert, opening the journal carefully. Harrison Morrison's oldest son, William, your brother who died at 16 in a car accident when you were 12. The color drained from Robert's face. We don't talk about William. Exactly, I said. But Grandfather wrote about him, about how William's death changed you, how you went from a laughing, carefree boy to a driven, angry young man, how you decided that if you couldn't be the son William would have been, you'd be twice the son achieve, twice as much never fail, because failure meant confirming you were the wrong son to survive. Linda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Robert never told me, because Robert never processed it. I continued reading from the journal. Grandfather wrote, I failed Robert after William died. I was too consumed by my own grief to see his. He built armor out of ambition, thinking achievement could fill the whole loss created. I fear he'll pass this damage to his own children, demanding they be perfect because he never forgave himself for being the imperfect son who lived. Tears streamed down Robert's face, the first I'd seen since Grandfather's funeral. He knew, and he blamed himself for not getting you help, I said softly. He wrote, I pray Belle finds this someday. She has the strength to break the cycles I helped create. Tell Robert I loved both my sons, the one I lost and the one I failed to save. The room was silent except for Robert's quiet sobs. 40 years of suppressed grief poured out as Linda moved to hold him, their artificial distance crumbling in the face of raw truth. This is what therapy will address, Dr. Sterling said gently. Not just recent betrayals, but generational trauma, the wounds that created the behaviors that wounded others. It's deep work, but it's the only way to truly heal. Jake moved to our father, placing a hand on his shoulder. I never knew about Uncle William. You never told us we had an uncle who died. Because talking about him meant admitting I wasn't enough, Robert choked out. William was brilliant, kind, everything a firstborn should be. I was just the spare who got promoted by tragedy. You were a 12-year-old boy who lost his brother, I said firmly. Not a replacement or a spare. A grieving child who never got to process that grief. And that unprocessed pain poisoned everything that came after. Emma joined the family cluster forming around our parents. Is that why you were so hard on us, because you were being hard on yourself? Robert nodded, unable to speak through his tears. The titan of industry who'd terrorized boardrooms and crushed competitors was just a broken boy who'd never healed. This is why I built Everest Holdings, I revealed. Not just to save companies or make money, but to break cycles of family trauma that destroy businesses from within. Every company I've acquired has similar stories. Unprocessed grief, unspoken pain patterns passed down through generations until someone finally says, enough. Walter Fitzgerald wiped his own eyes. Harrison would be proud, Belle. You've done what he couldn't face, what he couldn't face. So the question remains, I said, returning the contracts to the table. Will you sign these and commit to the hard work of healing, or will William's death claim more casualties through the damage it's caused? Will Grandfather's fear come true, or will we finally break the cycle? Robert looked at the contracts through blurred eyes, then at his family, damaged, but present broken, but not beyond repair. I've spent 40 years running from therapy because it meant facing William's death, facing the guilt of being the one who lived. But I see now that running has cost me more than facing it ever could. He picked up the pen with a steady hand. I'll sign not just for the company or to avoid prosecution, but because I'm tired of carrying this alone. I'm tired of making my children pay for my pain. And I'll sign, Linda added, because I've enabled this dysfunction by prioritizing appearances over healing. I knew Robert was broken when I married him. I thought love would fix it. Instead, I helped him hide it, and we passed it on to our children. Jake and Emma nodded their agreement, understanding that this moment was bigger than business or betrayal. This was about breaking generational patterns that had claimed victims for decades. As they signed the contracts witnessed by Walter Theodore Marcus Patricia and Jennifer Martinez, I felt grandfather's presence in the room. Not the stern businessman from the portraits, but the loving grandfather who'd taught me that strength meant knowing when to fight and when to forgive. "One more thing," I said as the final signature was notarized. "Daniel's been sitting in his car for 3 hours. Emma, whatever you decide about him, please go tell him. He loves you enough to wait in the cold. That deserves an answer." Emma looked at me with new understanding. "You really did want us to be happy, didn't you? Even while we were plotting against you." "I wanted you to be whole," I corrected. "Happy comes after whole. Now go. We'll be here when you get back." As Emma left to face her own moment of truth, the rest of us began the delicate work of transitioning from crisis to recovery. The contracts were signed, but the real work was just beginning. As Emma's footsteps faded down the hallway, the study felt smaller, somehow more intimate with the business concluded and only family and close allies remaining. The weight of what had just transpired began to settle over everyone like a heavy blanket. The legal documents were signed, but the emotional reckoning had only just begun. Jake was the first to break the silence, moving away from the group to stand by the bookshelf where grandfather had kept his collection of business biographies. "Do you know what the worst part is?" he said, not turning around. "It's not the humiliation or the exposure. It's realizing how much energy I've wasted hating myself for not being you, Belle." "You hated me," I said gently. The live stream made that clear. "No." Jake turned his face drawn with exhaustion and clarity. "I hated the version of you I created in my head, the perfect daughter who made everything look easy, the genius who never struggled, the favorite who abandoned us." He laughed bitterly. "But that wasn't you at all, was it? You were drowning just like the rest of us, just better at swimming." He pulled out his GA coin again, the one he'd carried for 4 years. "In recovery, they teach you to make amends. Real amends, not just apologies. I've been thinking about that all night. How do I make amends for helping plan your destruction? How do I make amends for letting you sacrifice everything while I played the victim?" "You start by staying sober," I said simply, "and by being honest about why you gambled in the first place." Jake nodded slowly. "Dr. Sterling, I want to start therapy tomorrow if possible. Not in 6 months when the contract requires it. Tomorrow. I've been sober from gambling for 4 years, but I've been drunk on resentment for 32. It's time to detox from that too." "I'll clear my schedule," Dr. Sterling assured him. "Early intervention shows commitment to change." Linda had been sitting quietly, her usual perfect composure completely shattered. Now she stood approaching me hesitantly, like a stranger seeking permission to come closer. "Belle, I need to tell you something about why I went along with the plan to exclude you." "Mom, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted, her voice stronger. "Because if I don't say it now, I'll find ways to avoid it forever." She took a deep breath. "I was jealous of you. My own daughter and I was jealous. You were everything I'd wanted to be at your age. Smart, independent, brave enough to chase your dreams instead of marrying the first successful man who showed interest." The confession hung in the air like a physical presence. Robert looked at his wife in shock, seeing her perhaps for the first time in years. "I married your father at 22, Linda continued. Gave up my own education to support his career. Had 3 children by 30 and spent the next 20 years being Mrs. Robert Morrison instead of Linda." Her voice cracked. "And then I watched you refuse that path. Watched you choose Stanford over marriage to the Patterson boy. Watched you build a career while I built dinner parties. And instead of being proud, I was bitter. So when Robert suggested excluding you from the inheritance, I didn't fight it. I encouraged it. Because if you could have independence and success, why should you have money too? Why should you have everything I'd sacrificed?" "Mom," I said softly, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the perfectionist who'd criticized my choices, but a woman who'd given up her own dreams and resented watching her daughter claim hers. "I'm 61 years old. Linda said, tears flowing freely. "And I don't know who I am outside of being a wife and mother, but I want to find out. Dr. Sterling will therapy help with that." "It's never too late to discover yourself," Dr. Sterling assured her. "Identity work is some of the most rewarding therapy there is." Patricia had been recording again, but openly this time with everyone's implicit permission. "I'm documenting the healing now," she explained. "If the downfall went viral, shouldn't the redemption too?" Robert had composed himself somewhat, though his eyes remained red-rimmed. He walked to where I sat, then did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He knelt beside my chair, taking my hand in both of his. "I've been a terrible father," he said simply. "Not just recently, but for most of your life. I demanded perfection because I couldn't face my own imperfection. I punished independence because it reminded me of my own failures. And I nearly destroyed the one child who actually embodied everything I claimed to value." "Dad," I started, but he shook his head. "Let me finish, please. I need to say this." He squeezed my hand tighter. "When you were 7, you came to my office with a business plan. You wanted to sell lemonade but had created a whole supply chain model with cost projections and profit margins. Do you remember?" I nodded, the memory surfacing through years of buried pain. "I told you it was cute, but to leave business to the grown-ups," Robert continued. "You looked at me with such disappointment. Not because I dismissed your idea, but because I dismissed you. And I've been dismissing you ever since, even as you surpassed every expectation, even as you saved us all." He stood still, holding my hand. "I can't undo the past, but I can promise that whatever time I have left, I'll spend learning to be the father you deserved. If you'll let me..." "I built a $300 million empire to save you," I said quietly. "Do you really think I'd give up on you now?" The moment was interrupted by the door opening. Emma entered, her face flushed from the cold and what appeared to be recent crying. But there was something different about her, a lightness that hadn't been there before. "Well," Jake asked, "what happened with Daniel?" Emma held up her left hand where a simple but elegant diamond ring caught the light. "He proposed. Again. Said he'd been carrying the ring for 3 months but couldn't ask while living a lie." "And you said yes?" Linda asked, maternal instinct overriding the evening's upheaval. "I said maybe," Emma replied, which shocked everyone. "I told him I needed to become someone worth marrying first, someone who earned her achievements instead of stealing them, someone who knew who she was outside of being the pretty Morrison daughter. I asked him to wait a year while I figured that out." "And he agreed?" I asked. "He said he'd wait forever if needed." Emma smiled sadly. "But I told him a year would do. If we're meant to be, we'll both be better people by then. If not, at least we'll have grown." "That's very mature," Dr. Sterling observed. "Taking time for individual growth before committing to partnership shows real wisdom." Emma looked at me directly. "I learned it from watching you, Belle. You could have come back and fought us directly when you discovered our plans. Instead, you took 2 years to build something extraordinary. You played the long game. I want to do that with my life." Theodore, who'd been observing quietly, finally spoke up. "This is what I hoped to see 10 years ago. Family members choosing growth over stagnation, honesty over facades. Robert, you lost one brother to death and another to your inability to change. Don't lose your children too." "I won't," Robert promised. "Not anymore." Walter Fitzgerald checked his watch. "It's nearly midnight. You've all made commitments tonight that will take years to fulfill. But every journey starts with a single step, and you've taken yours." Jennifer Martinez stood preparing to leave. "From the SEC's perspective, I'll be monitoring the situation closely. The therapeutic requirements and structural changes should prevent future issues, but vigilance is necessary. Belle won't always be there to protect you from yourselves." "Actually," I interjected, "I will be. That's what family does. Not enabling, but protecting. Not hiding mistakes, but helping recover from them. The difference is, now we'll do it honestly." Marcus had been making notes throughout the evening. I'll file the restructuring documents first thing tomorrow. The transition period begins immediately. Belle, as CEO, you'll need to address the employees soon. The live stream has created uncertainty. Monday morning. I confirmed. All hands meeting. We'll be transparent about the changes while assuring them their jobs are safe. In fact, we'll be hiring. Everest Holdings resources mean expansion, not contraction. Margaret Sullivan and David Chen prepared to leave as well. Belle, you've exceeded every expectation tonight, David said warmly. Your grandfather would be proud. You've saved not just a business, but a family's soul. The work's just beginning, I reminded him. Signing papers is easy. Changing patterns that have been entrenched for generations, that's the real challenge. As the business associates filed out promising to reconvene Monday for transition planning, the family was left alone with Dr. Sterling and Patricia, who'd become an unexpected ally. First family session is Sunday, Dr. Sterling announced. I know it's soon, but momentum matters. 2 p.m. my office. Everyone attends, no exceptions. Even me, Patricia asked hesitantly. Your family, Linda said, surprising everyone. Dysfunctional family, but family nonetheless. Your outside perspective might be valuable. As Dr. Sterling left, the Morrison family stood in grandfather's study, forever changed by one Thanksgiving evening. The grandfather clock chimed midnight, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another. What now? Jake asked. Do we just go home and pretend none of this happened until therapy? No, I said firmly. We go home and start being honest. Jake, call your sponsor tonight. Tell them everything. Emma, journal about your real feelings, not the ones you think you should have. Mom, Dad, talk to each other. Really talk. Not about business or social obligations, but about William and dreams and the fears you've never voiced. And you, Robert asked, what will you do? I'll start planning how to merge Everest Holdings resources with Morrison Industries' potential, I said. But first, I'm going to visit grandfather's grave. Tell him the family business he built survived its darkest hour. Can we come? Emma asked softly. All of us. It seems like something we should do together. I looked at my broken healing family. An hour ago, they'd been my adversaries. Now they were simply human beings struggling to find their way back to love. Yes, I said. Let's go tell grandfather that the Morrisons are finally coming home. As we prepared to leave gathering coats and car keys, Patricia made one last video entry. To everyone who watched the Morrison family fall apart tonight, keep watching, because tomorrow we start putting it back together, and that's a story worth following. The cemetery was shrouded in November mist as our small convoy of cars pulled through the gates. It was past midnight now, technically Friday, but it felt like we existed in some liminal space between the family we'd been and the family we might become. The headlights cut through the darkness as we wound our way to the Morrison family plot, where generations of our ancestors lay beneath carefully tended stones. Harrison Morrison's grave stood at the center, a modest granite marker for a man who'd built an empire. Beloved husband, father, grandfather, built with love, led with integrity. The words seemed to judge us all as we gathered in a semicircle, our breath visible in the cold air. Robert stepped forward first, pulling out a flask from his coat. Dad always kept bourbon in his desk, he explained, pouring a small amount over the grave. Said deals should be toasted properly. His voice broke. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry for what I became, for what I let happen to your legacy. He knelt on the cold ground, uncaring of his expensive suit. I turned your company into a weapon against my own children. I perverted every lesson you taught me about family and business. But Belle saved us, just like you knew she would. Jake joined his father, placing his GA coin on the gravestone. Grandpa, I'm 4 years sober. You never knew about the gambling because Belle protected me, but I think you would have understood. You always said everyone deserves a second chance. Thank you for raising someone who believed that. Emma approached next, removing her designer scarf and wrapping it around the stone. I used to think you loved Belle more because she was smart like you, But now I realize you loved us all. I just couldn't see it through my own insecurity. I promise to earn my achievements from now on, real ones." Linda stood back uncertain until I took her hand and led her forward. "I never felt good enough for this family," she admitted to the stone. "The girl from the wrong side of town who married up. I spent 40 years trying to prove I belonged, and I taught my children that love had to be earned. Harrison, I'm sorry for failing the family you entrusted to me." Finally, it was my turn. I touched the cold granite, feeling the carved letters of his name. "Grandpa, I did what you asked. I saved Morrison Industries from the Morrisons. It cost everything, but it worked. The family is broken, but not beyond repair. The company will survive and thrive. Your legacy endures." I pulled out the letter he'd left me, now worn from years of reading. "You told me that the strongest steel goes through the hottest fire. We've been through the fire tonight. Now we'll see if we're strong enough to emerge as something better." Patricia, who'd been documenting quietly, lowered her phone. "Mr. Morrison, you don't know me, but I've been jealous of your family my entire life. Tonight I learned that even the most successful families can lose their way, but I also learned they can find it again with help. Thank you for raising a granddaughter wise enough to light the path home." We stood in silence for several minutes, each lost in private thoughts and prayers. The mist swirled around us, giving the moment an otherworldly quality. Then Robert spoke again, addressing not the grave, but his family. "William is buried 3 rows over," he said quietly. "I haven't visited his grave in 20 years. Too painful. But I think it's time." We followed him through the maze of headstones to a smaller marker. "William Harrison Morrison, beloved son and brother, 1965–1981, gone too soon." Robert collapsed beside it, 40 years of suppressed grief pouring out in wrenching sobs. "I'm sorry, Billy. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I survived when you didn't. I'm sorry I've been such a terrible brother, letting your death poison everything I touched." Jake and Emma looked at each other in shock, only now fully understanding the ghost that had haunted their father their entire lives. They knelt beside him, offering the comfort he'd never allowed himself to receive. "He loved baseball," Robert choked out. "Wanted to play professionally. Had scouts looking at him. I was the businessman, he was the athlete. When he died, I tried to be both. Failed at both." "You didn't fail," I said gently. "You survived, and you built something William would have been proud of even if you lost your way. The fact that Morrison Industries exists for us to save means you succeeded more than you know." Linda knelt beside her husband, holding him as he grieved for the brother-in-law she'd never met, the ghost who'd shaped her marriage in ways she was only now understanding. "We'll come back," she promised the stone. "Bring flowers. Tell him about the family. Make him part of our lives instead of a secret shame." After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, we helped Robert to his feet. He looked older, but somehow lighter, as if releasing the grief had physically unburdened him. "There's something else," he said, his voice rough. "Something I've never told anyone. The night William died, we'd fought. He wanted to skip college and try for the minor leagues. I called him an idiot, said he was wasting his potential. The last words I said to my brother were, 'You're going to be a failure.'" The weight of that confession settled over us all. 40 years of driving his children towards success suddenly made terrible sense. Every harsh criticism, every impossible standard had been an attempt to ensure none of us ever heard those words, even as he made us feel them constantly. "He knew you loved him," Walter Fitzgerald said, stepping out of the shadows where he'd been waiting by his car. "I'm sorry for intruding, but I couldn't leave without... William came to me that night after your fight, asked me to talk to you to help you understand his dreams. He said, 'Bobby just wants me to be safe and successful. He doesn't understand that I'd rather fail at something I love than succeed at something I hate.'" Robert turned to stare at Walter. He said that, "He loved you, Robert. said you were the best big brother anyone could ask for, just a little too protective. He was planning to apologize the next morning to find a compromise. The accident stole that chance, but it didn't steal the love. Fresh tears streamed down Robert's face, but these seemed different. Cleaner somehow, like a wound finally able to drain after years of festering. "We should go," Linda said gently. "It's nearly 2 a.m. We have a company to run tomorrow and therapy to prepare for." As we walked back to our cars, the family dynamics had subtly shifted. Jake walked with Robert, talking quietly about recovery and grief. Emma and Linda linked arms, two women discovering they might actually like each other once the competition ended. I walked with Patricia and Walter, the unlikely allies who'd become part of our story. "You orchestrated all of this, didn't you?" Patricia asked me. "The timing, the revelations, even having Walter here at the cemetery." "I planned for possibilities," I admitted. "But I couldn't orchestrate the choices. Each person here tonight chose truth over comfortable lies. That's what made the difference." Back at the house, as everyone prepared to leave, Emma pulled me aside. "Belle, I need to ask you something. When you were building Everest Holdings, when you were watching us plot against you, did you ever want to just let us fail? Let us destroy ourselves without saving us?" I considered the question honestly. Every day. Some nights I'd lie awake imagining the satisfaction of watching your plans crumble without my intervention. But then I'd remember Grandpa's words: build with love, lead with integrity. Letting you fail without trying to save you would have violated both principles. "We didn't deserve it," Emma said quietly. "We didn't deserve your protection or sacrifice." "No," I agreed. "But love isn't about what people deserve. It's about what they need. And you needed someone to believe you could be better than your worst moments." Emma hugged me, then the first genuine embrace we'd shared in years. "I want to earn it. Not your love, I understand that's unconditional now, but your respect, your trust. I want to become someone worthy of being your sister." "You already are," I assured her. "You just need to believe it yourself." As the family dispersed to their respective homes, I stood in the driveway of our childhood house. In 12 hours, everything had changed. The company was saved, but transformed. The family was broken, but beginning to heal. The future was uncertain, but no longer hopeless. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen. "Transition team assembled. Ready for Monday's announcement. Proud of you, boss." Another from David Chen. "Markets respond well to family reconciliation stories. Expect positive coverage to balance tonight's viral drama." But the one that mattered most came from Jake. "Thank you for not giving up on us. See you at therapy Sunday. I'll bring coffee. The good kind, not the Morrison Industries break room swill." I smiled, looking up at the November sky where stars struggled to shine through urban light pollution. Somewhere up there, I hoped Grandfather Harrison and Uncle William were watching, seeing their family finally choose healing over harm. Monday would bring challenges. The employees would need reassurance. The business community would need explanations. The integration of Everest Holdings and Morrison Industries would require delicate navigation. But those were tomorrow's battles. Tonight, for the first time in 5 years, I wasn't fighting alone. I had a family again. Flawed, damaged, complicated, but committed to becoming something better. The girl who'd sacrificed everything to save them had become the woman who'd teach them to save themselves. The porch light was on at the Morrison house just as it had been throughout our childhood welcoming family home, no matter how late the hour. I touched the doorframe gently, a benediction and a promise, then headed to my car. There was one more stop to make before this night ended. One more conversation to complete the circle of redemption. 6 months later, Morrison Industries hummed with an energy I hadn't felt since grandfather's days. The early morning sun streamed through the office windows as I reviewed the quarterly reports, each metric telling a story of resurrection that even my most optimistic projections hadn't anticipated. 43% growth. Walter Fitzgerald announced entering my office with 2 cups of coffee. He'd taken an advisory role, coming in twice a week to mentor and observe. Your grandfather's best quarter was 31%, and that was during the post-war boom. I accepted the coffee, gratefully gesturing for him to sit. It's not my growth, Walter. It's what happens when a family stops sabotaging itself and starts collaborating. Through the glass wall of my CEO office, I could see the transformation in action. Jake stood at a whiteboard leading a morning briefing with his operations team. His posture was different now, confident without arrogance, authoritative without cruelty. The employee engagement scores for his division had tripled in 6 months. Jake's innovations in customer service are getting national attention, Walter noted, following my gaze. That predictive support system he developed, 3 companies have already inquired about licensing it. He always had the talent, I replied. He just needed to believe it himself. In the marketing department, visible through the open floor plan we'd implemented, Emma was in her element. She'd traded her designer suits for smart casual wear that let her move freely between departments, building bridges instead of walls. Her latest campaign had won 2 industry awards achievements entirely her own. The business school wants Emma as a guest lecturer, Walter continued. Her thesis on authentic brand storytelling in family businesses is groundbreaking. Professor Williams called it doctoral level work. She's considering it, I said, pride evident in my voice. After she finishes her MBA, she wants to have the full credential before teaching others. The transformation wasn't just individual. The entire culture of Morrison Industries had shifted. Where once employees had worked in fear of the Morrison family's volatile dynamics, they now engaged with enthusiasm. The suggestion box had become an innovation portal. The break room, once a place for whispered complaints, now hosted collaborative brainstorming sessions. Dr. Sterling's here, my assistant announced over the intercom. The family session is ready in conference room A. These sessions had moved from Dr. Sterling's office to Morrison Industries once a month, integrating therapeutic work with business operations. Today was special, our 6-month review where we'd assess progress and plan next steps. The conference room had been redesigned to feel less corporate and more welcoming. Comfortable chairs replaced the rigid boardroom seats. Plants softened the corners. Natural light flooded the space. The Morrison family that gathered here bore little resemblance to the one that had nearly destroyed itself 6 months ago. Robert entered first, and the change was remarkable. The harsh lines around his mouth had softened. His military rigid posture had relaxed into natural confidence. He wore a simple polo shirt instead of his armor of expensive suits, having learned that authority came from wisdom, not wardrobe. "Good morning, Belle." He said the words simple but weighted with genuine warmth. "I reviewed the supplier contracts you flagged. You were right about the sustainability concerns. I've reached out to 3 alternative vendors who meet our new ethical standards." Linda followed, carrying a box of pastries from the local bakery. "I thought we should celebrate," she explained, her smile reaching eyes that had rediscovered joy. 6 months of growth deserves recognition. At 61, Linda had bloomed. She'd returned to school pursuing the psychology degree she'd abandoned 40 years ago. Her insights in family sessions had become invaluable, bridging the gap between business strategy and emotional intelligence. Jake arrived with Emma, the siblings chatting easily about a joint project they were developing. The rivalry that had poisoned their relationship had transformed into genuine collaboration. They discovered that working together multiplied their strengths rather than dividing them. 5 years, 3 months sober. Jake announced, placing his coin on the table as had become his custom at these sessions. And 67 days since I last compared myself negatively to anyone in this room. 73 days since I took credit for someone else's idea. Emma added, pulling out her own token, a small compass she'd bought to remind herself to find her own direction. And 2 weeks since Daniel and I set our wedding date, next spring when the garden is in bloom. Patricia entered last, still documenting, but now as the family chronicler rather than an outside observer. Her series on the Morrison family redemption had gained a massive following, with other business families reaching out for guidance on their own healing journeys. 3 million views on the latest video, she reported, the one about Jake's customer service innovation. Comments are 90% positive, with dozens of families sharing their own stories of business dysfunction and recovery. Dr. Sterling took her place at the head of the table, but the configuration had changed. Instead of her presiding over a group of resistant patients, she now facilitated a team of committed individuals working towards shared growth. 6 months. She began warmth evident in her professional demeanor. When we started, I told you that healing wasn't linear, that there would be setbacks and struggles. What I've witnessed instead is a family that took every challenge as an opportunity to prove their commitment to change. She pulled out her notes, though we all knew she barely needed them. Robert, you've addressed 40 years of unprocessed grief about William while learning to lead with vulnerability instead of dominance. Your employees no longer fear you, they respect you. The difference is transformative. Robert nodded his hand, finding Linda's automatically. I visited William's grave yesterday, told him about the company's success. For the first time, I could hear his voice in my head saying, "Good job, Bobby," instead of condemning silence. Linda, Dr. Sterling continued, you've reclaimed an identity beyond wife and mother while simultaneously becoming a better partner and parent. Your academic work on family business dynamics is already influencing the field. I got an A on my midterm, Linda announced proudly. My professor said my paper on emotional inheritance in business families was publication-worthy. I'm considering a doctorate after graduation. Jake, your recovery has expanded beyond gambling to encompass workaholism, perfectionism, and competitive dysfunction. You've become a mentor to others both in GA and in the business community. 3 sponsees now, Jake confirmed. All business owners struggling with addiction and family pressure. Belle refers them to me. I share my story and we work together toward health. It's the most meaningful work I've ever done. Emma, Dr. Sterling smiled. Watching you discover your authentic talents has been remarkable. You've proven that you never needed to steal achievements because your own capabilities exceeded what you took credit for. Emma blushed but held her head high. The Forbes interview comes out next week. They're calling me one of the authentic voices in family business. They specifically praised how I've openly discussed my past frauds as part of the healing journey. Transparency as strength, not weakness. And Belle. Dr. Sterling turned to me. You've transitioned from secret savior to collaborative leader. You've learned that protecting people doesn't mean hiding their failures, but helping them grow through them. The integration of Everest Holdings and Morrison Industries has become a Harvard case study in redemptive acquisition. We're all works in progress, I said, uncomfortable with praise even after months of therapy. But we're progressing together. That's what matters. Walter cleared his throat. If I may add an outside perspective, 6 months ago I attended a family destroying itself. Today I see a board of directors that happens to share DNA. You've professionalized your relationships while deepening your personal connections. Harrison would be beyond proud. Speaking of the board, I said, pulling up a presentation on the conference room screen, I have a proposal. Morrison Industries is ready for the next phase of growth. We've stabilized operations, revolutionized culture, and proven that redemption is profitable. It's time to expand our impact. The screen showed a new initiative, the Morrison Foundation for Family Business Healing. Using profits from both Morrison Industries and Everest Holdings, I propose we create a foundation that provides therapeutic support, business consulting, and financial assistance to family businesses struggling with dysfunction. Free services for companies under $10 million in revenue sliding scale for larger operations. Paying it forward, Robert said immediately. I vote yes. Seconded, Linda added. My research could support the therapeutic protocols. Jake and I could run workshops, Emma suggested, looking at her brother for confirmation. Sibling rivalry to collaboration, our specialty. Jake nodded enthusiastically. And I could expand the addiction support network. So many business leaders suffer in silence. The board unanimously approves, Walter declared with satisfaction. Harrison's legacy expands from building a business to healing an entire sector. Patricia was already filming. This is huge. The Morrison Foundation could transform how family businesses handle generational trauma and succession challenges. As the meeting progressed, discussing implementation details and potential partnerships, I marveled at the journey we'd taken. 6 months ago, we'd been adversaries united only by blood and mutual destruction. Now we were allies united by purpose and mutual support. "There's one more thing," Robert said as the session concluded. "Belle, I've been thinking about succession planning, real succession planning, not the manipulative version I practiced before." The room tensed slightly. Old wounds had healed but left scars that could still ache. "I'm proposing that in 5 years, when I reach 70 and Linda and I fully retire, the CEO position doesn't automatically go to you." He continued, surprising everyone. "Instead, all 3 of you should have the opportunity to present your vision for Morrison Industries' future. The board, including outside directors, will decide based on merit, not birthright or favoritism." "You're serious?" Jake asked. "Completely," Robert confirmed. "We've learned that assumed inheritance breeds entitlement and resentment. Fair competition based on demonstrated capability and vision that builds excellence." Emma grinned. "So we have 5 years to prove ourselves worthy of leading grandfather's company." "Our company," Linda corrected. "It belongs to all of us now and to the employees who've made its resurrection possible." "I accept the challenge," I said, looking at my siblings. "May the best Morrison win, and may Morrison Industries win, regardless of who leads it." "That's the spirit," Dr. Sterling said approvingly. "Healthy competition within a framework of mutual support. You've graduated from dysfunction to high functioning. My work here is transitioning from intervention to maintenance." As the meeting concluded, the family dispersed to their various responsibilities, but there was a cohesion to our movements now. We weren't scattering to avoid each other, but spreading out to cover more ground while remaining connected. I remained in the conference room with Walter and Patricia. "The viral video of the Thanksgiving confrontation has been viewed 50 million times," Patricia reported. "But the redemption arc has exceeded that. People are calling it the most honest portrayal of family business dynamics ever captured." "Fame was never the goal," I said. "But if our pain and recovery help other families avoid similar destruction, then transparency serves a purpose." Walter stood to leave, pausing at the door. "Harrison used to say that businesses are like gardens. They need the right conditions to grow, but also pruning to thrive. You've pruned away the dysfunction and created conditions for extraordinary growth. What blooms from here will be magnificent." As the office filled with the energy of a thriving business, I took a moment to appreciate the transformation. Morrison Industries hadn't just survived, it had evolved. The family business had become a business family professional in operations, while personal in connections. The integration with Everest Holdings had brought resources and expertise that amplified our capabilities. Other portfolio companies were learning from Morrison Industries' transformation, creating a ripple effect of healing across the business landscape. My phone buzzed with messages. The Wall Street Journal wanted an interview about redemptive capitalism. Stanford Business School proposed a case study on family trauma and business success. The American Psychological Association inquired about our therapeutic model for corporate healing. But the message that mattered most came from Jake. "Family dinner Sunday, Emma's cooking, which means we'll probably order pizza when it burns. But we'll be together. That's what counts, right?" I smiled, typing back, "Together is all that counts. I'll bring dessert and a fire extinguisher." 6 months ago, that text would have been impossible. The casual affection, the self-deprecating humor, the assumption of gathering without agenda, all signs of a family that had remembered how to love without conditions. The sun climbed higher, illuminating Morrison Industries with the promise of a new day. Somewhere, I knew Grandfather Harrison and Uncle William were watching, seeing their legacy not just preserved, but transformed into something greater than they'd imagined. The business of family had become the family of business, and both were thriving beyond our wildest dreams. 1 year later, the Morrison family gathered once again for Thanksgiving. This time, the dining room radiated genuine warmth rather than hidden agendas. The same mahogany table that had witnessed our near destruction now hosted our restoration set with china that had been in storage since Grandfather's time, finally worthy of use again. The transformation was evident in every detail. Jake had arrived early to help with cooking, his sleeves rolled up as he worked alongside Emma in the kitchen, their laughter echoing through the house. Linda arranged flowers she'd grown in her new greenhouse, a hobby discovered during therapy that had become a passion. Robert sat in the living room with Daniel, Emma's husband of 6 months, discussing the young man's promotion at Morrison Industries, earned entirely on merit. I stood at the window watching snow begin to fall when Patricia arrived with her family, including her teenage daughter, who'd become fascinated with our story of redemption. "Aunt Belle," the girl said shyly, the title still new but growing more natural. "I'm writing my college essay about the family business transformation. Is it okay if I interview everyone?" "Of course, Sarah," I said warmly. "But remember, the story isn't finished. We're still writing new chapters every day." The documentary Patricia had produced about our journey had won 3 awards and sparked a national conversation about family business and the courage to change. More importantly, it had helped dozens of families recognize their own toxic patterns and seek help. "Places everyone," Emma called from the dining room. "Dinner is served, and miracle of miracles, nothing is burned." We gathered around the table, the seating arrangement natural now rather than strategic. Theodore had joined us, no longer estranged, but an integral part of the family's healing. Dr. Sterling sat beside him, having become as much friend as therapist over the months of work together. "Before we eat," Robert said, standing with a confidence born of humility rather than arrogance, "I'd like to share some news. The Morrison Foundation has officially helped its 100th family business. From the Hendersons in Maine dealing with succession trauma to the Nguyens in California, healing from addiction-related embezzlement, we've proven that our model works beyond just our family." Applause filled the room, genuine and warm. "The foundation wouldn't exist without Belle's vision," Linda added, raising her glass of sparkling cider. "But its success comes from all of us sharing our struggles honestly. Jake's addiction workshops have saved 3 businesses from bankruptcy. Emma's sibling rivalry seminars have prevented 2 family splits. Even my research on emotional inheritance has helped families recognize patterns before they become destructive." To family, Robert toasted his voice thick with emotion. Not perfect family, but honest family. Not family without problems, but family that faces them together. To family, we echoed glasses touching with crystalline chimes. As we began eating, conversation flowed naturally. Jake shared updates from his sponsees, celebrating victories and acknowledging setbacks with equal grace. Emma discussed her MBA graduation top of her class, with a thesis already being adapted into a book. Daniel spoke about the innovation lab he was launching at Morrison Industries, with full support from leadership that valued fresh perspectives. "The numbers are remarkable," Walter said, cutting into his turkey. "Morrison Industries' revenue has doubled in 18 months. Employee satisfaction is at 92%. The Everest Holdings portfolio has grown to 20 companies, all implementing variations of our therapeutic business model. More importantly," I added, "our family happiness index, as Dr. Sterling calls it, has increased infinitely. Hard to calculate percentages when you start from 0. Laughter rippled around the table, the kind that comes from people who've learned to find humor in their hardest truths. "Speaking of Dr. Sterling," Emma said with a grin, "I have an announcement. Daniel and I are expecting, due in June. And yes, we've already booked parent counseling to make sure we don't repeat family patterns." The celebration that erupted was joyful and genuine. Linda cried happy tears. Robert spoke about being a grandfather who'd learned from his mistakes. Jake promised to be the fun uncle who'd teach the child about resilience and recovery. "Have you thought about names?" Patricia asked camera, discreetly recording this latest chapter. "If it's a boy, Harrison," Daniel said, "after the man who built the foundation we all stand on." "And if it's a girl?" I asked, though something in Emma's smile suggested she already knew. "Belle," Emma said simply, "after the woman who saved us all." I felt tears spring to my eyes, unprepared for this gesture of love and recognition. "No child should carry that burden," I protested gently. "It's not a burden," Emma insisted. "It's a reminder that strength comes from love, that success means lifting others up, and that family is worth fighting for. Those are lessons any child would be blessed to carry." The meal continued with discussions of the future. Morrison Industries was launching an international division, taking our model of business healing global. The foundation was developing certification programs for family business therapists. Academic institutions were creating curricula based on our experience. "There's something else," Robert said as dessert was served, his grandmother's apple pie recipe finally used again after years of being too painful a reminder of better times. "I've been discussing with the board, and we've made a decision about succession." The room grew quiet, old anxieties flickering despite our growth. "We're not waiting 5 years," he continued. "Effective January 1st, I'm stepping down as chairman. Belle will continue as CEO, Jake as COO, and Emma as CMO. But the chairman role that goes to Theodore, someone who's seen our dysfunction from the outside and can ensure we never slip back into old patterns." Theodore's surprise was evident. "Robert, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Robert urged. "Say you'll help protect this family from itself while nurturing its potential. You've got the perspective we need." "I accept," Theodore said solemnly, "on one condition. We institute term limits. No position held for more than 10 years without board review. Power needs to circulate to prevent stagnation." "Agreed," we said in unison, another sign of how far we'd come. As the evening progressed, snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in pristine white. Inside, the Morrison family basked in a warmth that had nothing to do with the fireplace and everything to do with healed hearts. "You know what I'm most grateful for?" Jake said, his 5-year coin catching the candlelight. "I'm grateful we fell apart, because if we hadn't hit bottom, we never would have found our way to something better. Our destruction became our salvation." "Beautifully put," Dr. Sterling agreed. "In psychology, we call it post-traumatic growth. You don't just return to baseline after trauma, you transcend it, becoming stronger and wiser than before." To post-traumatic growth, Linda toasted her psychology degree, having given her language for experiences she'd only felt before. Patricia's daughter, who'd been quietly taking notes, raised her hand like she was in class. "I have a question. If you could go back, would you change anything? Would you prevent the whole confrontation from happening?" The family exchanged glances, years of therapy having taught us to consider such questions seriously. "No," I said, finally speaking for all of us. "Every painful moment led us here. Jake's gambling taught us about addiction and recovery. Emma's insecurity revealed the damage of conditional love. Mom and Dad's favoritism exposed generational trauma that needed healing. Even my isolation showed how martyrdom masquerades as virtue. We needed every lesson. The only thing I'd change," Robert added quietly, "is I'd have gotten help sooner. But perhaps we weren't ready. Perhaps we needed Belle to build Everest Holdings to prove that salvation was possible before we could accept it." As the evening wound down, we gathered in the living room where a photographer waited. We decided to commission a new family portrait, replacing the stiff, formal one that had presided over our destruction with something reflecting our renewal. "No fake smile," the photographer instructed. "Just be yourselves." The resulting image captured us perfectly. Imperfect people choosing connection over conflict, growth over stagnation, love over fear. Jake's arm draped casually over my shoulder. Emma leaned into Daniel while Linda and Robert held hands. Theodore and Patricia flanked the group, integral parts of our expanded definition of family. Dr. Sterling and Walter sat with us advisors who'd become cherished friends. "One more shot," the photographer said. "This time, everyone look at Belle." The suggestion was spontaneous, but as my family turned toward me, their faces radiated something I'd never dared hope for during those lonely years at Stanford: gratitude, mixed with love, respect, tempered by affection, and most importantly, genuine seeing of who I was rather than who they'd needed me to be. Later, as guests departed and the house quieted, I found myself alone in Grandfather's study with Robert. He was placing the new family portrait on the desk next to the photos from our past. "Your grandfather visited me in a dream last night," he said quietly. "First time since he died. He said 4 words, 'Thank you for Belle.'" "Dad," I started, but he held up his hand. "Let me finish. I spent so many years resenting you for being what I couldn't be, for choosing freedom over obligation. But I see now that your freedom saved us all. You broke the chains I was forging tighter with each year. So from me, not from a dream, but from your father. Thank you, Belle. Thank you for loving us enough to let us fail, and wise enough to catch us when we fell." We embraced then father and daughter, CEO and founder, but mostly just 2 people who'd found their way through darkness into light. As I drove home through the snowy streets, my phone buzzed with messages from other families who'd watched our journey. The Richardsons in Texas were entering family therapy. The Lynns in Seattle had restructured their business to prevent sibling rivalry. The Andersons in Florida had confronted their patriarch's addiction before it destroyed them. Each message reminded me that our story had become bigger than us. The Morrison family redemption had sparked a movement proving that business success and family health weren't mutually exclusive, but mutually reinforcing. I pulled into the driveway of my new home, a modest place compared to what I could afford, but perfect for the life I'd chosen. Inside the wall displayed photos from the past year, Jake's 5-year sobriety celebration, Emma's MBA graduation, my parents' 40th anniversary party, where they'd renewed their vows with honest promises, Morrison Industries' record-breaking quarter celebration, and the Morrison Foundation's ribbon-cutting ceremony. But the photo that mattered most sat on my bedside table, the whole family at Grandfather's grave, on the 1-year anniversary of our transformation. We'd gathered to tell him about our journey, about the family business that had become a business family, about love rediscovered and purpose renewed. In the photo, snow dusted the gravestone where we'd placed flowers and Jake's 6-year coin. Our faces showed tears and smiles in equal measure. The complex emotions of people who'd traveled through hell to find heaven wasn't a destination, but a choice, made daily. As I prepared for bed, my laptop chimed with one final email. The Harvard Business Review wanted to feature our story as their cover article, The Redemption Model: How One Family Transformed Trauma into Triumph. I smiled, typing a quick acceptance before closing the computer. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that redemption wasn't a one-time event, but a continuous choice. Morrison Industries would continue growing. The foundation would help more families. We'd face setbacks and celebrate victories always together. But tonight I simply felt grateful. Grateful for a grandfather who planted seeds of wisdom in rocky soil. Grateful for a family brave enough to change. Grateful for allies who appeared when needed most. And grateful for the hardest moments that had forged us into something unbreakable. The Morrison family story wasn't ending. If anything, it was just beginning. But the chapter on betrayal and destruction had closed forever, replaced by one of healing and hope. We'd proven that love could survive anything if people were willing to do the work of resurrection. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the world in possibility. Inside, I fell asleep knowing that sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is the chance to fail coupled with the wisdom to help them rise. And we had risen, oh how we had risen. The business of family and the family of business had merged into something beautiful, a legacy worth leaving, a story worth telling, and a future worth building together. Dear viewers, as we close this chapter of the Morrison family journey, I want to ask you, what patterns in your own family need healing? What conversations have you been avoiding that could lead to transformation? If our story has touched you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that redemption is possible. Like this video if you believe in second chances. Subscribe to follow more stories of families choosing healing over harm. And comment below with your own experiences of family business dynamics, whether triumphant or challenging. Thank you for witnessing our journey from betrayal to belonging. May your own family find the courage to face hard truths and the wisdom to grow through them. Remember, it's never too late to rewrite your family's story. Until next time, this is Belle Morrison reminding you that the strongest families aren't those without problems, but those who face them together. With love and hope for your own transformation. The Morrison family.